Good day, everyone. Welcome to the 6th annual EnergyDATA Workshop. This is our 6th annual and our second one that is being live streamed. We hope that by next year's event we'll be able to see everyone in person. That would be great. Our topic this year is clean marine technologies, which seems very appropriate as I look out the window here at the Halifax Harbour. We have some weather today. If you're in Halifax, you will have noticed you don't often see whitecaps and spray right in the harbour, but that's what we have today. So I hope wherever you are that you've got the hatches battened down and that you're riding out whatever comes your way, and that you're able to join us for today's event. We're live streaming from COVE, the Centre for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship. Many of you will be familiar with, and for some it may be new. And I just want to give a bit of a sense of place for where we are in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. This place has a long and storied human history. We're here in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We live and work here together with peace and friendship treaties that guide our relationships. Today, as we're discussing clean marine technologies, I invite all of us to give some thought to how we can enact the principles of peace and friendship in our work together today and going forward. Just a few introductory details. First of all, thank you to the province of Nova Scotia and to COVE. We hear the wind coming in, someone just opened the door. And to COVE and to CTAC for co-sponsoring the event, making it possible for us to live stream today. Also, the Nova Scotia Community College Ocean Technology students have prepared video submissions on their capstone projects, which we'll see later, so thanks to them. When we get to the question and answer periods, you can submit your questions really anytime when the panel discussions are on. Just put them in the chat. You just add a screen name to join the chat and add your questions in the chat section of Vimeo where you're watching the live stream. The questions are, of course, first come, first serve as they come in, so we might or might not get to all of the questions. Hopefully there'll be lively discussion. And we have a fairly short day today for a virtual event. We want to keep it nice and short and tight. So we haven't allocated specific break times, but obviously take a break as you need to. So that's the kind of housekeeping details for today, and I'll get started with our agenda. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, who is Adam Kennedy, who it's been my great pleasure to do a bit of work with already, and I hope to continue to. Adam is the president and founder of Smagnus Maritime Safety and Security, and we've been working together on a project which I'm very excited about. Adam is Mi'kmaq from Annapolis Valley First Nation and has a long and strong experience in the marine sector, and I think also in navigating various perspectives on how to work and how to work together. Adam will be opening our event today with a presentation on two-eyed seeing, which is a concept that I really appreciate learning about, and I hope that you will too. So I think we are, pretty much right on time. So over to Adam.
Morning, everybody, and thanks for the great introduction, Wayne. So I've been asked this morning to speak on two-eyed seeing. I don't have a presentation, but I'm rather just gonna share my story and my perspectives on two-eyed seeing. So I'll start with my story. As a young man, I my parents had separated, and I found myself growing up between two cultures. So as I grew into adolescence, I noticed that I was struggling between families, trying to find my identity between Mi'kmaq culture and an Irish culture or Canadian culture. So during this process, I noticed that as I grew, I started to notice my perspectives were difficult. I noticed having many perspectives, but I had a hard time finding my identity. So that I noticed, also with the events and sports and schooling and education, I found it hard sometimes because I was always struggling between understanding from two perspectives. So later on in life, I found myself at 26 years old, I found myself being indoctrinated into the military through basic training. As we all know, or some know, that is quite a difficult process, and it was a very rewarding process, and it was a very rewarding career. During my career, I noticed again I was having the same difficulty understanding and giving my perspectives and understanding my perspectives and realizing there's something more to how I'm growing and how I'm understanding things, and I wasn't really clear on it. So just recently, I heard about Albert Marshall's knowledge on two-eyed seeing and the concept of it, and how it's relating to science and how people are trying to understand it. And I believe it's not only applicable to science, but I believe it's applicable to everyday life. And I believe everybody in some concept have their own understanding of two-eyed seeing from maybe life experiences that they've had in their life. The reason I think this is because when I released from the military and I transitioned into civilian life, I found myself again, with a whole new perspective, and it didn't really have anything to do with being Indigenous, but it had to do with transitioning into civilian. So that was a very difficult process, and I could almost feel the emotions coming again to me as I felt when I was an adolescent, and trying to identify, how I was, I guess, fitting in and relating to my everyday life. So the concept of two-eyed seeing, I believe, is it's something that we need to, I guess, all take a look at and find our own way of understanding it, not just from an Indigenous lens, but from your own personal lens, because it's applicable in everyday life, and it's almost like a sense of magic. We can think we know what we're reading in science, and if it's, we can say, well, the tree says this and the plants say this because science says that, but really it's like, we're still learning about all these things, and there's still undiscovered things about science. And it's the same with two-eyed seeing, I think, is we're always finding new ways to understand things from a different lens. So, So, and also with my experience here at Cove and with my business and understanding how this is getting, how my business is, I guess, interjecting into the industry. I'm bringing my perspective, and again, I'm finding myself, bringing two lenses and bringing the Indigenous perspective and my military perspective and my other Marine perspective, and it's all applicable, but it's difficult sometimes to define where I'm fitting in, because I'm being identified as an Indigenous business owner, or maybe I'm just a business owner. So again, it's hard to fit in sometimes, and I guess be part of just an industry rather than being part of or being identified as an Indigenous business and just being whoever. So, but so that pretty much sums up my perspective. And I'm open to some questions.
Cool. Great. So am I unmuted again? Yeah. Thank you, Adam. Very good to see you even on the screen, and to hear a bit about two-eyed seeing. The first thing, I just wanted to really let people know kind of the exciting work that you and SMACNIS are doing around like electrification of boats and so on. And our team met Adam and Magnus to kind of work together on a design for a small electrification project for a rigid-hulled inflatable boat. And I know that you have big plans for your company and its sustainability. We have a few we have a few minutes available. Did you want to say a few words about what Magnus is up to? Oh, I can't hear Adam. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So our business is, we have two divisions. We have a security division and a marine division. So our marine technical services division is right now we're really geared towards electrification, marine electrification. Currently, we are the owner of Ludici. So Ludici is a diesel powered and electric propulsion vessel. It was converted into this. It was a 48 foot Cape Cod. There was a project done by Glass Ocean. So they're still currently working on our behalf to have this vessel certified as a electric propelled boat. But we are currently undertaking our own project to electrify ribs. So we currently have one 16-foot rib that's at the Cove. It's actually, we're going to be doing some testing once the weather gets better. And we're also going to be scaling up pretty soon a new 19-foot rib, rigid hull inflatable boat. So the idea was to develop hybrid ribs, but we've decided that, with weight displacement and the size of the vessels that we're working with, we're just going to go pure electric. So this is very exciting. We anticipate to have 2 electric boats by the summer 2022. So you can see these boats at the Cove. We'll be testing them at the Cove and around Halifax Harbor. And we anticipate, we plan to develop more. And the idea is to hopefully, scale this project up where maybe someday it will have a military application, or an application for other federal departments where they would maybe see the feasibility to transition to electric propulsion rather than gas propulsion.
That's super exciting to be seeing electric boats appearing right here at Cove. I know we're working on another project. Cove, we all know we have to get some charging infrastructure in place now. That's a whole other part of it, right? So the boats are coming. They need to be charged. I'm super curious, if it's okay to share it, like, what are some of the first applications of these electric boats? I know you mentioned that a long-term goal is to be able to use them in military applications, but what do you envision they can be used for sort of out of the gate once they're tested?
I believe the first application would be for ocean tech research or any type of research happening along the inshore. We've recently conducted some research along the coastline of Nova Scotia, both eastern and southern shores. And we've noticed that when accessing multiple GPS coordinates, it can be very hard on the gears of an engine when constantly shifting forward and reverse. So with an electric propulsion engine and the throttle controls, it's very smooth. There's no banging into gears back and forth. It's like a smooth motion forward and back, and it's very precise. So I as a boat operator, I already know like how beneficial that will be when manipulating the controls of a vessel, trying to keep a vessel on station. So we're very excited to see how that will work, and also test out the range and the time of the batteries that we plan to use. And we're excited to work with other partners too and discover how we can identify more powerful, smaller fuel cells. So this is all exciting, and technology is advancing very quickly around this. So we're very, very excited.
Cool. I guess just kind of one last thing. I appreciated your story about kind of your personal history and coming through navigating a lot of different ways of looking at things, or different cultures. Even you mentioned that the military culture is a very different culture from civilian culture, and and indigenous culture and settler culture, and there's so much navigation to do. I guess, maybe just a last question. What do you see as some of the benefits that experience has brought to the work that you do today?
I believe it's helped me. It's driven me to be adaptable. I found myself always I found myself in situations where I had to adapt at a very young age. So when I got to the military, I found it easy to adapt because I've already have been through some experiences where it was very difficult and I had to adapt. And being, I guess as an adolescent, I discovered, even traveling between like visiting my family here in HRM or down the Ocean Shore or going back home to the Annapolis Valley, during those times, it was going from one place to another, culture to another. It was difficult and it was emotional but it helped me see how adaptable I was and how I could fit in and be both of those cultures, and that's who I am. I'm a Mi'kmaq. I come from a Mi'kmaq family. My mother's Mi'kmaq. My father's comes from an Irish family. So I've learned to I guess be very adaptable. Yeah, it's the best way to put it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Firstly, for all of your work, and secondly, for really giving us a great start to get our Energy Data Workshop going this morning, and hope to see you again in person soon. And I love that you mentioned when the weather is better, you can test the boats. Like, don't take them out today. It's wild out there. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everybody. Have a nice day.
You too. So next up, our next presentation is a duo. I think this is going to be an exciting one. AYK Energy, a marine battery manufacturing company. And our two speakers are Ed Carney and Chris Kruger. And they are going to be joining us from Norway. So I guess they didn't have to get up as early as if anyone's joining us from BC. But Ed is going to be talking about the pros, cons, and realities of energy storage in marine applications. I'm presuming from a battery perspective. And in the duo, Chris is going to dive into the data that they have collected on operating these systems. So we're pretty much exactly on time. I hope that our speakers are there online. Yeah, we're good to go. All right, then I'll turn it over to Ed and Chris. Thank you.
Hi. Greetings from Norway. So, can you guys hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you.
There's a little bit of a delay. So we just came from work, so you gotta excuse all this stuff. I'll start. Can you guys hear? I mean, it seems to be a delay on the screen, but can you guys hear us okay?
Yeah, there's a bit of delay in the audio, but we can hear the audio fine, and we can see your image quite well.
Okay, great. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the. All right, where the heck is it? Great. No, I'm going to do is give us a second. I'm going to.
A little bit choppy, but we'll give you a minute.
I'm switching to another network. Might help us out here.
Okay.
Seems like our.
By AirPlay. What do you want to do?
Oh no, not that's that. This is what we're going to. All right. Share that.
And if there are presentation slides, they haven't shown up yet, but hopefully
Can you
soon.
see them now?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right,
there
I'll
we
put this
go.
in presentation.
I see some slideshow.
All right, I need to put that in do you see it in presentation mode now?
Yeah. Oh, it looks great.
All right. All right, great. Well, Chris will start out, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, guys, I will start this. We're going to start this presentation just talking a little bit about our company, just as a brief introduction. The company was established in 2018. Why I'm telling you about this is to make sure people understand this is a Chinese company. We went to China in 2018 to get closer to the supply chain and to make sure that we can make more cost-effective batteries, which I believe we managed to do in this period of time. In 2019, we spent our time to develop a BMS from the ground up. That's the most important part of the battery. So we concentrated on the BMS and we incorporated everything that we've learned in the marine industry since 2010 into this BMS. And part of this BMS is not just the safety factors, but we actually, from the beginning, incorporated the cloud-based connection, and I guess this is why we are here to talk about that today. In 2020, we partnered with EVE. It's a fairly big cell manufacturer in China to develop a high-power battery. They were interested in our technology to see how it worked. We did that successful. In 2021, we actually got DNV type approval on the battery. And we also moved closer to CATL. Now, CATL is the largest cell manufacturer in the world, and this is just to show that that the decision to go to China was the correct one, because you get much closer to our supply chain. In 2022, we are now preparing for ramp up for production. We have orders already, and there's a lot more coming. So in order to do this, we move our head office from Boan, which is in Shenzhen, main Shenzhen, to the site areas of Shenzhen to have our initial factory set up there. You can see the pictures on the right of the new facility. And we also secured land next to the CATL factory in Wuhan, which will help with getting interfaced with them more easily and more straightforward. We started marketing really the end of last year, and Ed and myself has been traveling Europe and North America. We got great market penetration. Everybody's interested to hear what we have to say. So we think we're in the right place at the right time. And this is what I want to say about the company. So I'm handing over to Ed.
Okay. Yeah, just since you guys gave us this venue, we'll give you a shameless self-promotion, a little quick overview of our product. Just for a few seconds, just so you know what we're coming from. That picture right there is the battery we're working on right now here in Norway. It's a 422 kilowatt hour battery. 1,000 volts. Anyway, this is there's four kind of pillars we stand on where we feel differentiates us from the rest of the industry. One is our energy density. We feel we have at the system level the highest energy density available in the industry today. As you can see here at the module level, our largest battery is 137 watt hours per kilogram. That's a high energy module. And on the other side of the spectrum, our it's power module, but it's really just a high powered energy module is at 99 watt hours per kilogram, which is still fairly decent. The other, if you look at it at the containerized level, in 2014, it was only possible to put about 1 megawatt into a 20-foot container. Today, we're able to put up to 2.8 megawatt hours in the same 20-foot container. So there's been quite a bit of development in the last 8 years on battery technology in general, try to get things more efficient that way. Also, we consider we have the safest battery in the industry right now. That's for two reasons. One is the chemistry that we use, which is LFP, which is a more stable chemistry. During a thermal event or during a cell failure, it takes a full 5 minutes of overcharge after cell failure before you start to get decomposition of the electrolyte and the start of a thermal runaway event. So it's a much slower process, which gives it quite a quite a high level of safety. And the other is we have in-module firefighting. So any kind of event that did happen in the module, it would be quickly extinguished with water mist in the module. The other is we have the lowest price. It's a fire sale going on right now. Now we just we include everything, and because we're very close to our supply chain, we can offer a very, very low cost of about $400 per kilowatt hour for everything across the board. And lastly, we feel it's the easiest to install. There's a little picture of Chris and I doing the installation here. That is sped up. We didn't really actually work that fast, but we actually mean also at the commissioning level, the easiest to install, meaning we don't need to be there for commissioning. The BMS and the system has been designed from the ground up to be commissioned remotely, and that we feel makes it a very, very easy, user-friendly system to commission. Let me stop that video. How do we do this? Just go ahead. All right, there. And now we move on to the next. Oh, Jesus. There we go. So now we'll get into the to my part of the conversation, which is the pros, cons, and realities. I think a lot of people, especially here today, are pretty familiar with the pros and cons of energy storage. I'll just talk briefly about that. But when it gets down to the reality, this name came up from a conversation Nikki and I had several months ago when we talked about us being a part of this conference. And I kind of got a bit passionate about my feelings about the industry and our relationship with our clients and some of the disconnects about what they feel is possible and what we can deliver, and some of their misconceptions and how that affects what we're doing. So I'm just going to go briefly into that a little bit. But to be quite frank, the reality is, and Chris will get into the data side, is that we're still learning about this. It's relatively new technology still, and we're still learning and gaining a better understanding of how energy storage works in these different applications. And the other thing is really no silver bullet. It's always about what works best for your application. So with that, I'll jump right in. Quickly going over the benefits that, like I said, I think you're all familiar with. One is and this is actually one of my favorites, is optimization of internal combustion engines. I came from that side of the world, so I really feel more of an attachment with that. It's in the sense of you allow a generator to work in its more optimal range. In any kind of application, you're going to produce so many kilowatt hours, and it's better to produce those kilowatts in a more lower specific fuel consumption part of the diesel engine or whatever internal combustion engines range. So like in the 40 to 80% range, as opposed to the 0 to 30%. So you try to avoid that low load, inefficient range of a fuel burner. The other is zero emission operation, which we're all familiar with. It's say the Ampere down here, which is a fully electric ferry that's in the best cases being recharged off renewable energies, like in Norway, hydro, and in BC and other parts of Canada, hydro would probably be the predominant renewable that you would use for that. The other would be blackout prevention. I kind of use this also for, I would say, spinning reserve, where say in a DP2 operation, where you have to have more than one generator operating on a bus, you would be able to, instead of having those two generators operating at a low efficiency, you could have one generator running, and your blackout prevention or your spinning reserve would be this battery. So that's one way of looking at blackout prevention. The other is simply as blackout prevention, as in a hybrid vessel like on the top. If the diesel generators tripped, you still have so much available energy to run the vessel until you can get your generators running again, which obviously allows for a much smoother, safer operation. Lastly, enhanced dynamic response. And I think our previous speaker actually talked a little bit about this with the electric boats and how easy it is to operate them at low loads. And the dynamic response between, say, going fore and aft, it's much, much more dynamic in in electric propulsion, but even more with energy storage, because you have that instantaneous power. There's no ramp time you're waiting for with a diesel generator operating. So you have much, much quicker response, and that makes for a more efficient, safer operation. Now we got the drawbacks, and I think we're all pretty familiar with these. Cost, batteries are expensive and battery systems are expensive because you have more than just the battery there. You have to look at the power electronics, transformers, the entire engineering of that system, and the power management, energy management system that has to sit on top of that. All that takes time, and money, and effort to put together. Weight, batteries are heavy, and their auxiliary systems that go along with that actually bring weight and complexity. The complexity of integrating all that stuff together, it's not well understood outside of certain realms, and this is kind of a big hurdle for some people to get over. And the other is the perceived safety issues. I mean, there's I tongue-in-cheek put the picture of the Tesla Roadster burning up there, but we all understand there's a lot of chemical energy stored up in these batteries, and if it's released uncontrolled, that can be very dangerous. So the videos all over the internet showing that. So that is a reality that we have to deal with. So now we look at the results of all this. When you decide that you want to go for energy storage, there's a drive for the smallest battery system possible. And of course, this is a good thing. In a marine application, you need to be concerned with weight and space all the time. So the smallest battery that takes the least amount of weight up is very important to the performance of the vessel overall. And like I said, space is dear on any vessel, and you really need to be concerned about how much space you're using. And also from a financial standpoint, you want to spend the least money for the most return. So all this is it makes perfect sense. But when it comes to specifying a system, this is what happens. And I bring up the Dunning-Kruger effect because I think we're all familiar with it, where a little bit of knowledge, you have no knowledge, you have no confidence. But a little bit of knowledge, a lot of people, become very confident and think they know a lot. And so let's talk about some of our clients or some of the people we deal with who are in this zone. When they look to get a system, they tell us about the application. And this is absolutely right. We need to know, is it a fully electric ferry? Is it a tugboat? Is it a DP2 vessel? All these types of things are very, very important for us to know when it comes to specifying a system. But inevitably, they bring up C rate. And whenever they bring up C rate, they ask for a 3C battery. And we'll get into this in a little bit. They'll also tell us if they want liquid cooling or air cooling. And we'll talk a bit more about this later. And lastly, they'll specify a chemistry. Oh, they want a particular chemistry. And whenever we hear these things, we usually think they either read something on LinkedIn or something, or read an article, or worst of all, they may be talking to some sort of consultant out there. So apologize to any consultants in the audience. So let's get into C rate. C rate's a term that we use in our industry all the time, every day. I mean, Chris and I are working on a installation right now, and C rate, we've said it 1,000 times today if we've said it once. But when it comes to the marketing sales side of things, I think it's a very overused term, and we'll get into this right now. For one thing, I think when a client mentions that they want a high or a 3C battery, what they're really looking for is the smallest, lightest, cheaper battery possible. And of course, that's a good thing, but there's more to consider than just C rate when you're looking for that sort of thing. And when they start mentioning C rate, it really, if by itself, it means nothing. I mean, can it be continuous, instantaneous, RMS C rate? Is it just what it's capable of for a one-shot thing, and most of the time it does nothing? That's all extremely important when it comes to specifying a battery. And just mentioning a single number means nothing. But when it does come to C rate, if there's one thing we'd like to explain is that for you to know is that there's power applications and energy applications, and there's degrees of that. But usually the dividing line for that would be anything above 1C would be a power application. Anything below 1C would be more or less an energy application. So it's kind of a little dividing line, kind of way we see the barrier between those two types of general power applications. So let's talk a little bit about high C rate versus low C rate. So when people ask for high C rate, what they don't realize that is in a high C application, you're going to have higher currents. And when you have higher currents, there's more resistance and more heat. And when you get more heat equals losses. So you have higher losses in a higher C rate application than a lower C rate application. In a high C rate application, because of the heat, you're going to need liquid cooling, and that adds complexity to a system. And with the low C rate, you can normally get by with just air cooling is perfectly adequate. And those, because of that complexity and those liquid cooling, you're going to have a lower energy density. So for the same kilowatt hour battery with a high C rate, it's going to be heavier. And obviously with the lower C rate, you have a higher energy density for that system. And the other thing with high C rates is you're stressing the cells. No matter how effective your cooling system is, the cells are still stressed under those high C rate conditions. And also you're not able to use the entire capacity of the battery during those high C rates. And I won't get into the reasons for that, just trust me. So on a lower C rate application, you can actually use more of the capacity of that battery during those applications, during those operations. A little bit about air cooling versus liquid cooling. Liquid cooling is extremely effective at cooling batteries. Very, very good. It's direct. Some systems are extremely good and can actually allow a battery to operate at 3C continuous. And that's very good. But it's not always necessary. An air-cooled system is really is not called for when you have anything over 1C. You really cannot cool the battery adequately. So if you have an air-cooled system, you're pretty much limited to continue operation below 1C. You can do instantaneous for very, very short periods of time, but then you got to make it up later by having lower C rates to allow the battery to settle and cool down. With liquid cooling, there's going to be added costs, obviously, because of you have to have pumps and you have to have things to the mechanisms to cool, to have the water flowing and things like that. Air-cooled systems are less complex, less costly. That's the added weight that goes along with that complexity. And in most situations with a liquid-cooled system, even though you have a chiller, you still need an HVAC system as well. So that's just more added complexity and cost that you need to consider. Not necessarily a bad thing, just something that you need to consider when you're asking for these things. I'll go briefly into chemistry. This alone we could spend hours on. So the three predominant chemistries in the industry today are NMC, LFP, and LTO. And Chris is showing me the clock. I'm running late. So I'll try to rush here. LTO is a good all-around chemistry. It's got its pluses and minuses. LFP, same thing. LTO, they're all good at what they do. But, and again, since I'm taking way longer than I should, good thing to understand is they all have their pluses and minuses. It's really depends on how they're used and what makes the most sense. So you really shouldn't get caught up in chemistry. I'm back to the Dunning-Kruger curve. So with the people we deal with, the big integrators, they're more in this zone here. And when they ask us to specify a system, this is what they ask for. They, of course, bring up the application, just like I said before, but then instead of C rate, they ask for power requirements, charge, discharge, a profile, operational profile. You know, how's the vessel operating? What are the actual kilowatt ratings in charge, discharge that we're looking at? They give us a cycle count. How many times per day does it do that? And then they give us how long they want the battery to last. And this is really all we need to specify a battery. So I'll jump right into a practical example. We have a fast ferry. I hate fast ferries. I mean, they're fun, they're great, they do something, but they have a lot of power. They're small, light craft. And if you want to try to use a battery on them, it's just a very, very difficult nut to crack. And especially if they have very quick turnaround times and you have to have high charges, it's just a lot of problems there. So this owner requirement on this particular one, I can't get into the details of it, but they had a 1-hour transit and a 30-minute charge time. So outside of the power requirements and all that, which I don't think I get into here, this was a power application. They asked for a 3C battery. Don't really know why. They asked for NMC specifically, probably because it does have such a high energy density at the cell level. And they asked for a 3-year lifespan because they thought that would give them the smallest battery possible. So we spec this with our power battery. And what we came up with our 6.9 kilowatt hour module was about 3.3 megawatt hour battery, which was actually right in line, more or less, with the NMC batteries that were being spec'd for this as well. So, but we looked at this again and said, well, what if we use our higher energy density energy battery? And we did. And so with our 17.6 kilowatt hour module, which is only good for 0.5 CRMS, which means a continuous operation, charge and discharge average cannot go over half a C. And the battery that we came out there was a 4.2 megawatt battery. But that battery lasts 9 years and was 10% lighter than the power battery. So if you get anything out of this, the point being is that just, trust your battery guy. Not all of them, but trust your battery guy and work with it. People who know what they're doing and just understand that there's no silver bullet. There's different ways to do this, and it's all about what's best for the right application.
Trust me, it's complicated.
Trust me, it's complicated. Coming from Mr. Kruger. So anyway, I'll pass it on to Chris here.
Okay, guys. So let's move into the data storage part of this, data storage and analysis. So why do we need to gather the data? Why is it important? So today, the battery behavior is still not well understood. We're really a young industry. This is only in the 90s that lithium batteries became available, and it's only really around 2000 that lithium ion became more known, and it's only in it's close to 2010 when people really start using it. So we do not know enough about these batteries yet, but we do know, and that everybody in the industry that work with these batteries for some time understand, is there are three factors that contribute to aging of the cell and can finally lead to some runaway if you don't look at it. So temperature is one. And of course, with temperature, you don't want to go with a high temperature. This is almost universal with all lithium-ion batteries. You don't want to go too high in voltage, even momentarily in some instances. And you know that you do not want to charge too fast. Fast charge current will age the cell a lot more rapidly. But exactly what the aging effect is for each of these limits, when you go at a certain rate over what you think you should go, that is not very well understood. This comes from the fact that these cells are tested in the manufacturers where they manufacture the cells. So it's in the manufacturer's test lab, typically, where the data comes from. And there you cycle the cell continuously, and you do different tests, but it's a continuous cycle. This is not a real-life application and a real-life behavior where you have low rates and high C rates and different temperatures during the day, etc. So the fact is that we do not have live labs to get this real data from. So for that reason, we do not really understand the battery well enough yet. And there might be things coming out that we didn't know that we really need to get from the data in the field. Furthermore, a BMS is designed to keep the battery safe, not to extend the battery life. The battery management system's job is to make sure your battery doesn't catch fire and you do not damage the battery to a point where it can damage property or human beings. So it is designed to isolate the battery if there's a failure, or to prevent a failure, not to extend the battery life. We do require other ways to be able to do this. So how can we optimize the battery life? And one of the things that people have proposed as well, you can program this into the BMS or into the EMS. Now, as I said before, you don't have enough data to do this, so you don't know the behavior well enough. So whatever you program is almost like hard coding, so it's very difficult to change, and therefore you may not address all the different issues that you want to address. And also, if you've programmed it into one vessel, if it's a new thing you've discovered, it's difficult to make that change to all the vessels or all the batteries, vessel or stationary that you have out there, because it's really kind of hard coded into your BMS or EMS. So let's get into how to gather and manage this data. So the first thing is you need to gather as much data as you can. The more data, the better. So we said the practical thing is to do really a 1 second interval of all the parameters that's available. Now, this results in massive amounts of data. On a large installation, you can have thousands of cells, and each cell has several parameters that you need to store at this 1 second interval. So it is not practical to transmit this data in live in real time. Therefore, you need a database on your BMS, and it needs to be a local database that is reliable and that you can trust, that will basically save this data in an ongoing basis. And it has to be large enough to store this data for extensive time of six months to a year. You will only transmit high-level data, that is a combination of all the data. And I'm not going to go into the specific parameters of this right now, but you basically want to get that information into the cloud at a much smaller footprint that you can do analysis in the cloud with robots to see if you can see any anomaly that's starting to develop. Once you've seen this, you can extract the data from the database. You can analyze it. One of the points to take note of here is owners don't like this. They really want you to not have continuous connection to their vessel. And this is an ongoing issue for all integrators. But you need to know that you're going to have to negotiate with the owner when and how you can get this data off. So how do we use this data? The point to understand here is every installation is different, and the same battery will react different in different installations. So what you need to do is you need to get a fingerprint of this battery's behavior once the battery is in full operation on the vessel, so that you know how this battery in this particular application is going to behave. And then through your continuous high-level data, you want to analyze against this fingerprint to see if you see anomalies developing that you don't expect to occur. Once you have that, of course, as I said before, you will extract this data from the BMS either by a service tech going to the site or getting temporary access to get the high-speed data, and then you can find what the anomaly is. You try to identify the root cause of this. Once you have the root cause, you will go and try and identify on all your systems in your database. And because you've got this data in a database in the cloud now, you can do automatic scanning and see if you've missed some vessel at some point that have the same kind of behavior, and you can then preemptive go and address that as well. So let's move on to a practical example to show how this works. This is a fingerprint that was taken from a vessel or from a battery on the vessel. So this is just a simple discharge with the relaxation afterwards. So what you can see in this particular case is that your cell voltages are nice and close together on the discharge. And when you stop discharging, when you release the cell, it's a nice slow decay curve, and all the cells are right on top of each other. It is a well-behaved system. So the first example that I want to show of anomaly is what you see on the screen here now. You have one cell that's initially dropping a lot faster than the rest of the cells, but the slope of the drop is the same as the rest of the cells. So furthermore, the relaxation curve is identical. So this tells you that this is not a capacity or impedance issue on the cell level. This has to do with the interconnects between the cells. And if you go and inspect this module or where this data was taken from, you will look for high impedance connections on your bus bars or your cables in the cell, because this is a very instantaneous behavior. If I go to the next example, this is more of a cell that has aged. So you see here, and what is really concerning in this particular case was that you have one cell that aged a lot faster than the rest. So here you see the cell is dropping faster. One cell is dropping much faster than the rest. There are a few others that are starting to drop a little bit quicker as well, but you have it dropping faster, and furthermore, its relaxation curve is slower than the rest. So this gives you two indications. You have a higher internal resistance, And independently of that, you have a less capacity. The cell has got less capacity left in it. And typically what you will do with this kind of behavior is you would go and identify this particular module and keep closer track of what's happening with it and see if this anomaly is perhaps increasing its rate of this behavior. And if it starts increasing the rate, then you will of course remove it and replace it with a new module. So this is what we have today. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us. We can go to the question and answers now. Stop the presentation.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ed and Chris, for an illuminating presentation. And we do have some questions coming in. I meant to remind people, send questions in the chat. And there's a whole system in the background. If you see me looking at my phone, it's because that's where the questions are coming to me. Jacob in the background is like getting the questions and texting them to me. So, but I'm going to actually start with a clarification just on my part. It's because not every member of our audience has necessarily got a lot of experience in the electric vessel industry yet. Can you just briefly define what C rate means and how it's defined? Because I know that's a number that you say is overused, but just give a brief definition.
You want to?
No, you get it, man. You're the Kruger on the.
Okay, so it's a very simple term. It just means that this is the current that you can take from a battery from when it was fully charged to when it's fully discharged in 1 hour. This is a simple test. It's done at the factory. It is usually at a specific rate that they do this test. A lot of times they will do the test at half C and then bring it back to the 1C rate. So 1C is the amount of current you can take from 1 hour for 1 hour continuously from this battery from when it's fully charged to where it's fully discharged. I'm not going to go into what fully charged and fully discharged means. There's some complexity there as well.
Yes, lots of details.
So a 2C battery, just to clarify a little bit more. So if you say you have a 2C application, it would drain that battery in a half an hour. If it's a half a C application, it would drain that battery in 2 hours.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And so clearly higher C rate means a battery that can be discharged and charged more quickly, which you've pointed out some people, for the application, that might be important. Okay, great. I will move to actually a question that came from the audience. Based on your experience, what do you see as the most feasible and high impact applications of battery systems in the marine sector in the short term? So near term, I know, and you mentioned fast ferries are difficult, but it looks like you managed to spec a battery for one. But what are the most feasible and high impact applications in the short term in your view?
Well, I think we see the highest impact. I would say harbor tugs. They have because of the way they operate, they have a lot of power, and they spend the vast majority of their time operating at very low loads. So, so looking at the application we looked at, that would be a hybrid application, or even fully electric. You would do that, but say in a hybrid application where you only use those big generators or those big fuel burners when you're actually doing bollard pull, and most of the time you'd be running fully electric. That's actually a lot of bang for the buck, in my opinion, because of that operational profile where it's got a lot of power that it's using very, very seldom of the time. Fully electric ferries are really good where you have the charging infrastructure. I think that's an easy one. If it's a regular run between one side and another, and it's very it's not going all over the place. That I think is also a lot of bang for the buck. So, and that's why we see that more than everything in Norway where we are right now. Virtually all the double-ended ferries are fully electric.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that certainly also makes a lot of sense to me, and it makes me think about. Well, obviously, we have a lot of harbor tour kind of boats in Nova Scotia as well, so that's a great application. Ferries are municipalities looking to do some electric ferries. it reminds me too about lobster fishing vessels, which power out at high power, and then they spend a lot of time on station where they need less power. So maybe there's a similarity.
Yeah, there's a lot of application. I mean, we could talk for hours just about that. So I didn't want to run on, but I just thought what was the most bang for the buck. But it's where you have a diesel application where you need high power, very little amount of time. So you have this big fuel burner that's operating most of its time at extremely inefficient range. To me, that's something you definitely got to look at. Like let's look at the opposite side of this. Where is it really difficult to make a lot of sense with the liners, the container ships that are running from point A to point B at high speed, very efficient diesels, like slow speed diesels, doing that with extremely high thermal efficiency. It's really hard in those applications to try to make those more efficient at this time, which is why they're looking at alternative fuels for the most part. But that kind of looking at what's not a lot of bang for the buck in the short term, that's what that would be.
Yeah, that's a good comparison on the operational characteristics makes such a difference. So another question that came from the audience, of all the disadvantages or cons that you listed, which were cost, weight, complexity, and perceived safety issues, which of those do you think the industry will make the most progress on in the near future?
Cost.
Cost, probably.
Cost, yeah. Overall, I think, and the complexity. I mean, we're getting better and better at this. But and I think the safety too. I mean, we're getting more comfortable. New technology is the perceived risk. I mean, diesel fuel is really not that dangerous. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like you put a match out in it at room temperature. Gasoline is extremely dangerous. So gas-powered boats, I would say, are way more dangerous than any kind of electric boat out there. Mm-hmm. So it's about the level of risk that you're used to. So I think it's just a matter of time before people come more, and we are hybrid. Please.
No, I can add this that if we talk short term, depends on what you mean with short term. I would say in 5 years plus, probably closer to 10 years, we will start seeing something like solid state batteries, and that will be a massive change in the amount of energy density you can get. It will not affect power because those is typically today not high power, but that will be a big change. But in the short term, cost, most definitely.
Totally makes sense. I'm going to take the liberty of adding a question of my own that I think kind of relates to this. In bringing down the cost, you mentioned that every installation is different, and I see that. I can certainly appreciate that. I wonder, what is the potential, if you have similar classes of vessels doing similar jobs, to grow to a point where these solutions are repeatable, right? Where there's, I think there's 15,000 lobster fishing vessels, and I focus on those a lot. Maybe I'm just hungry for lobster or something, but in Atlantic Canada alone. So I see them as doing kind of fairly similar work. What do you think about the future of like having a more prepackaged kind of system that works for a whole class of boats?
Yeah, let me take this one. So I can say this because I started in batteries in the automotive industry. And in the automotive industry, everything is precisely the same. If it's not the same, then it is not automotive. That's how they get the cost down. When I entered the marine industry in 2010, and I worked on my first vessel, I was very surprised to find a guy. I was below decks. I found a guy sticking his head around a porthole there and say, "Is there anything below here?" And I said, "No, we just drill a hole and put something in there." So there's nothing repeatable. So in general terms, what I can say is, if you look at something like a specific type of vessel, yes, the batteries you can standardize. You can have a standard rack. You can have a standard where it will be installed. If those batteries are built by the same shipyard, then you can probably standardize it very, very well. If it's not, and the battery size change or the environment of the battery change, where you have different equipment around the same battery, this is going to have an effect. So in general terms, yes, you can standardize on size and even form factor, but in specific terms, you're still going to get small nuances between them.
Makes sense. A couple more questions have come in from the audience. Are there more, is there more design validation and product validation to do for a marine system because of the greater vibration and shock, just the difference of operating in the marine environment? Essentially, is there more that you have to do in terms of design validation and product validation?
Yeah, it is the marine battery is exposed to vibration, but I'm not going to go back to automotive. That's not a fair comparison. Yes, you need to do more validation, and if you look at class rules like DNV and Lloyd's, then they do ask for fairly high tests to be done. Now, when you talk about design validation, this is something that every battery manufacturer can benefit from. The industry doesn't ask for that today, but this is on the company itself, how they do the validation. So to do certification, I think the rules are pretty strict in a lot of cases here, specifically DNV. So it's easy to follow that. When it comes to validation over a long period of time, it would benefit the battery manufacturers to do more long-term testing in their labs.
Yeah. Question in on a different topic, also from the audience. In these applications, what happens to the batteries at the end of their life? How much is developed now in terms of battery recycling or battery repurposing? I'll add a little bit of work that we're doing in our own group. There's a couple companies in Canada now that are repurposing used electric vehicle batteries from land vehicles for stationary applications because they still have quite a bit of capacity left in them. I know the marine electrification is quite new, but if a battery lasts a certain number of years, what are you seeing as kind of its next stage of life?
Yeah, this is a very common topic that already started coming up in 2008. People were talking about this. The repurposing of a battery from an automotive point of view is quite a simple thing to do. Depends on the chemistry. I'm not going to go into the chemistry either. It's too complicated. But my only concern is that it's very difficult if you don't have a good BMS and you understand, do these things I talked about, the data analysis before. You do not know how that battery is going to behave. So if it was me repurposing it, I'll put that battery somewhere outside where I don't care it burns something down. This is my only concern with it, but definitely it should be used, it can be used, it should be used. And in the marine industry, we'll find the same, where we design for a specific load profile that you need to satisfy. And when that load profile cannot be satisfied anymore, this battery is not more useful for this vessel, but there's still a long life left afterwards. Some chemistries more than others.
Yeah. Thank you for that. A couple more, we have several more questions, but I'm going to have to call it at that for time in order to set up for our next panel. Oh, I'm told that we have 1 minute. I will ask you a very quick question then. You mentioned, and I was very excited to see this, your battery module has a firefighting capability inside the module. And also you mentioned the better safety characteristics of it. What I wondered is how that development and those features mesh with legal requirements, regulatory requirements in different countries. So I know we often have issues getting a boat or a battery system approved for use on a boat or a vessel. What's your experience been in terms of, I guess, being able to prove that what you have meets the safety requirements of different countries' regulatory agencies?
Well, we started by doing our type approval with DNV and to show them how it works. And the nature of the design is such that this is a dry system. So there's no water close to the battery unless there is an event. And it's only when there's an event with triple safeties built in, would you actually release water, and only to the module in question. So we actually got very good response on this from different countries. They see this as a novel approach to this. And the idea behind this is really cool the cell down, and cool the cell down where the event's happening. Don't cool the battery room down. So it is actually quite well received, and I'm sure we're going to get pushback from some locations where people don't understand it well. But once it's explained and proven, and the tests are shown, then it will be accepted.
Great, excellent. That is our time, but thank you so much for joining us and for reaching us all the way from Norway. Exciting work, and yeah, hope to be able to talk more about these developments in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
Goodbye.
All right. So we are moving into our next panel, and very excited to say one of our panelists is here in person. Hello, Sue.
Hello, Wayne.
Sue. Okay, Sue, you have your mic now? Okay. I'll just get this all set up.
Nothing weird on my face?
Looking good? Okay, so our next panel, get my notes here. Decarbonizing marine vessels. And we have two panelists with us, one of whom immediately to my left here in person is Dr. Sue Malloy with Glass Ocean Electric. And I will, at the beginning, I'll ask folks to give a little intro to what your background and what your company does. So I won't work too much on introductions. But we also have Brent Perry from Shift Clean Energy, who is joining us online. And I think probably from the west coast of Canada. So thank you for getting up quite early. We're just coming from Norway, where folks had the benefit of being up in the midday time. So decarbonizing marine vessels through electrification and hybridization is something I know that both of you are doing a lot of very current work on. And we have panel discussion format here. So I'm just going to start with some of the opening questions. We've prepared some questions. And as I mentioned, to find my phone here, this is where Jacob is going to text me the questions that you have as the audience. So feel free to put those in the chat as we go along. But I'll start, I guess, here in the room first with Dr. Malloy. But for each of you, can you summarize in a couple of minutes what your companies are working on in the space of decarbonizing marine vessels?
Sure. Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. So my background, just to give a little bit about myself, is in marine naval architecture, ocean engineering, specifically in ship propulsion. And I got into electrification of vessels quite a while ago, and really started working on it from 2016. So the way we started in our company is we started collecting data so we could try to understand vessels and try to understand what the energy use was, because when you're designing for electrification, it's not as easy to just put an extra 50% fuel on board in case you need it. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand the vessels, and then we converted a vessel with Brent's company last 2020, and then during COVID. And then since then, we have been converting an additional vessel, and we are working towards a 10-boat project in the very near future.
Cool, excellent. And just tying back to our opener, Adam Kennedy, that vessel is the Alutasea.
That's right.
Very
yes.
well-known vessel here on the East Coast. First one on the East Coast to be electrified in this way. So yeah, congratulations on
Thank
that.
you. Yeah, we're very proud of that work.
Over to Brent. What's Shift Clean Energy up to?
We're evolving into more of a solutions company than just a pure energy storage business. So most recently, we've launched an energy subscription business that is designed to allow 100% zero emission operations of vessels in the formats of inland rivers and waterways, ports, ferry terminals, and wind farms. And so what we've done is take our energy storage system and package them up into e-pods and containers that can be loaded and unloaded onto the ship instead of having fixed battery installations on board. And this allows you to put a very small battery system on to get the range and the performance that you need, but not have to deal with the fixed asset. And it takes away a lot of the concerns the customers had about weight and cost, because they're not buying the energy storage system, they're subscribing to use it for a 10-year contract. And we've just announced the first contract for this. It's operating in a called Cargill, where we are moving cocoa for chocolate purposes because the company wants to make zero emission chocolate. So that's been a big focus of our business here for the last year in terms of launching that as a product and solution.
Thank you. I'm very excited about zero emission chocolate. I like that idea. And especially in
I think Nestle is going to actually launch a chocolate bar called the Net Zero or something to that effect.
Very cool. Okay, so that gives, I think, us a good sense of what your companies are working on. Given the diversity of our audience, and we like people coming from a lot of backgrounds, I think we should also cover the bases.
Yep.
So I'll turn this one back to Sue. Well, either really, to comment. Can you just explain for our audience the key differences between a diesel vessel, a battery electric vessel, and a hybrid of the two, and sort of design features that of those kind of vessels?
Sure. So the diesel vessels, everyone should be fairly familiar with. If you've been in a car, it's not too dissimilar. We have a diesel engine, and the shaft is connected directly to the diesel engine, and the propeller is connected to the shaft. You can have diesel electric systems, but we're just plain diesel. Shaft is connected to the diesel engine. When you have an all-electric battery system, you have an electric motor that connects to a shaft that connects to the propeller, and then that electric motor is connected to a battery system. In a hybrid system, you've got two types of hybrids. You've got serial and parallel. So you can have a parallel system is what we work with, which is it's like having an electric system and a diesel system and switching between them when you need them. So you are zero emissions when you're operating under electric. And a serial hybrid is when you have the fossil fuel topping up the battery. So it doesn't feel as much zero emission for definitions for Transport Canada, for example. But it is more efficient than a diesel system. What's really important to understand here is that if you can take the opportunity to disconnect the generation from the load, you can put anything in there. So what I mean by that is if you can have a motor run the propeller, and then the power generation could be a diesel engine. So this is what happened with podded propulsors. Back in the late 90s, these systems came about where they would have electric motors in these pods, and then the pods would swivel, and they would have a diesel engine somewhere in the ship that made sense to put it. When you have a diesel engine connected directly to a shaft, it has to go down the center line. It takes a lot of space. It defines the rest of the orientation of the vessel. But if you can have a disconnect between that, then you can put the parts where you need them. So if you have a parallel hybrid, you could put the generator on one side of the vessel, the batteries on the other, and you can have stability. So you've got a lot more flexibility. And then again, once you disconnect it, you can put in batteries, you can put in fossil fuel, you can put in hydrogen, you can put in fuel cells. There's lots of opportunity. So it's really important to get that disconnect at the beginning.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and it reminds me that, as you mentioned, quite a number of vessels out there already are diesel electric. So you're generating electricity to run a diesel, using a diesel generator, making electricity, and then you're running the propeller, let's say, from that.
Exactly, yeah.
It's pretty easy to see that lends itself well to adding batteries in, because you've already got an electric system, basically.
Exactly.
Even freight train locomotives are like that as well.
Yeah.
I guess then related question, I'll turn it over to Brent. I think that's been a quite clear explanation of the differences in the vessels, but you mentioned e-pods. So this is taking the batteries on and off to recharge them. Is that, yeah, can you kind of explain a bit more the difference there and the benefits of that?
Well, the benefit for what we're bringing to the table now is a complete ability to convert an entire fleet in a very, very timely fashion. So one of the challenges of our industry is that we ask the ship owners and operators to take on a great deal of the risk of adopting these new technologies. And as Chris and Ed pointed out, energy storage is still a very new sphere of industry. So there's not a lot of information, there's not a lot of practical history yet. So there's a lot of fear and concern when you're pouring your business finance capability into building ships that you just don't know how they're going to work. So one of the key elements of what we do with PowerSwap is we actually share that risk with the owners because we own the infrastructure. So instead of asking them to put out a lot of capital and deal with warranty and design issues, we take responsibility for all of that and allow them to effectively become users as a cash flow positive entity right from the very first day. And they pay as they go. And they also achieve the goals that we all have from a societal level, and in some cases, legislatively speaking, to become zero emission within a very short period of time in terms of operation. And for us to do that, if we're just going to rely upon the customer to buy the product or hope that the government's going to give them grants to buy the product, the adoption time is never going to meet the targets that we've set for 2030 and 2050. The reality is the ability to go zero emission needs to be a comprehensive effort from all parties involved in the industry. And by us being involved now with financing all of the systems that we can install on this basis, we're making it much easier for the client to transition into this, not risk their capital, achieve their zero emission goals, and not be burdened with the responsibility of maintaining a new technology that they don't understand or paying an exorbitant price to do that from third parties. So PowerSwap is really designed to both address the design and engineering issues of weight, cost, complexity, and make that a part of what we bring into the system, and literally allow the operator to worry about where do I plug in. And we're providing the swapping stations, what we're calling them. So the power swap stations are where you would actually physically pull up, and we'll have cranes on location to be able to lift the battery pods on and off the ships for you. And on the smaller pods, we can do that in under 3 minutes. And on the fully containerized systems, which can be up to 6 megawatt hour, then you're dealing with somewhere in the 15-minute range. But the key is we don't change the way you operate your boat. We don't affect your scheduling. We actually optimize and make you more competitive with things like trucks, because you now can gain greater range over 24 hours with this than you could have done it with a fuel-driven engine the way they were operating today. And you're doing it zero emission.
Yes. Thank you. I think that, that clarifies the value of that approach. Questions are starting to come in, by the way, from the audience. So those are lining up. Feel free to send them in. Just starting with one more from our pre-prepared list. Looking at the marine sector now, there are lots of vessels out there, and I'll go back to Sue for this one. The existing vessels that are out there, is it feasible to retrofit a large number of them? Could you tell us a bit about maybe the relative challenges between making a new electric boat designed from scratch as an electric boat or retrofitting? What's your perspective on the relative, where to focus a lot of attention?
So retrofitting is an important topic in marine space, because when you build a vessel, you don't expect it to last 5 to 10 years like you would with a car, right? People do get a new car in 5 years. It's normal now. There are people in the marine sector that will get new vessels fairly frequently, but in general, we expect these boats to last up to 20 years. And with ships, we can expect them to last even longer. So if you have a look at the Canadian Coast Guard fleet, there's some that have been quite old. So the challenge with retrofitting is you have to have a system that will generally fit a wide range of vessels. With ships, because they're so big, it's not as much of an issue because they tend to be custom projects anyway. So going in and dealing with a ship in a custom way is probably more the standard in the industry. You would expect it to be treated individually. When it comes to smaller vessels, if we want to see mass conversion, we need to have systems that can be changed very quickly. So one of the things to think about is if you had a fishing boat, you know, you have a Caterpillar engine or a Cummins engine or a John Deere or something, you know what that is, and you know that if you can replace it, the dimensions are there and you can work around it. So I think we're going to have that with the electrification space too, that here is an electrification kit and this is how you can retrofit. And what I want to see with our system is the boats come ready to go for us, so that we have a preferred partner that we work with, shipbuilders, Canadian Maritime Engineering, and that they would work with Canadian Maritime Engineering and then be ready to get their vessel converted. So it's going to take some action from people to be involved in this. We want to avoid getting caught in months-long conversions, or we're not going to be doing hundreds a year. It's going to just take too much time. The other piece that's important in the smaller vessel sector is that there is a 4-year, latest I heard is there's a 4-year waiting list in Atlantic Canada for a new fishing vessel. And these fishing vessels, so people understand, because sometimes when you look at them, you might not think that, you might think, you know, some of them look old and simple, but the vessels that are being built now in the kind of 35 to 55 foot range, they cost between $500,000 and $1 million. So they're not small purchases. So electrification in that space is not, it's not a crazy idea. No.
Yeah. And I guess similarly over to Brent, with the developments you're working on, are you seeing a lot more on the retrofit side or on the new build side, or both? What's the ratios?
For us, it's about 50-50 in terms of what we do, retrofit or new build. Sue's correct. If we don't look at a way to create repetitive mechanical electrical systems that can be easily installed on ships, it's going to slow down the adoption. Now, in the case of lobster boats and small fishing boats, those markets are less economically feasible for electrification simply because of the cost of the translation or the new build. So they are going to probably not occur as quickly as the bigger ships and the bigger opportunities can, because they have more capacity to generate payback. So one of the simple things for the audience to take away is that the most important characteristic of a vessel is how many hours a day does it work. So if you can have a ship operate 12 hours a day, the payback is relatively short. The impact is very obvious to the bottom line, and the investment is easier to make because you're going to recover that capital much sooner. In the case of a vessel that works seasonally, it's harder to make sense of this. And that's also where, you know, a lot of the work that Glass Ocean is doing right now to standardize packages and come up with translatable elements into an electrification package are going to be key to accelerating the smaller vessel adoption into these markets. And that is the simple truth of the economics. You can only pay for as much as you can pay for. On the new build side, you know, we focus very much on incredibly improving the efficiency of the vessels. So the e-pushers and the barges that we're doing with that chocolate contract have the capacity to carry 25% more freight at the same depth in the waterways than conventional barges do today. And that improvement allows us to move 25% more freight. So you can see the benefits. Obviously, you've got the same number of crew, the same size of boat, 25% more containers or dry bulk or whatever it may be. And these economics, you know, batteries are expensive enough today that whatever we do has to demonstrate at least no worse than a 5-year payback, or it simply is very hard for the industry to adopt. If we can stay below 5 years, and in some cases 2 or 3 years, or even a year, then the adoption is an overwhelming decision that's very easy for the operator to make. And that's what we all have to focus on, I believe, is identifying the models that adoption is inevitable because of the financial impact, and that the environmental impact is is now becoming much more instrumental in helping that financial impact have real meaning.
Great, thank you both. And I'll go to a question that has come in from the audience, and it actually almost matches one of the questions we already had, so I'll combine them. Asking from a technological perspective, in both your cases, what are the biggest technical or technological challenges that you still need to solve or still working on from your perspective in marine electrification? And in specifically, what's different? What are the technical challenges in the marine environment that you wouldn't otherwise encounter? And this time I'll switch up the order and go to Brent first, and then Sue.
Well, I think relative to the context of this conference is one of the key issues here, which is data management and data acquisition. We've always had very good software for managing batteries and safety and the performance of the batteries. We've converted that now over to asset management software that takes a look at not only the technical performance of all of the equipment, which frankly, there's in the last 10 years, there's been a huge amount of development on power electronics and equipment that suits these kind of installations. And it's gradually getting both into smaller vessel markets and bigger vessel markets as well. So that technology side of it, I think, is actually well in hand. But the data, which is going to ultimately determine how well this is perceived and develop value in electrification, there's still a lot of gray. And so we're all learning how to both acquire the information from the ships in terms of real operations and measure that against the real performance of the batteries. As Chris mentioned earlier, cell manufacturers only have very limited knowledge of applications that run 24/7 with varying load demands. It's not the amount of time it takes to test lithium is ridiculously long. So the practical users are the best test pilots in that regard. But at the end of the day, if you want to successfully implement an industry, you need finance and you need banks to be involved. And for them to come to the party completely other than wanting to support green applications, they want metrics that they can determine what is the real cost of operations, what is the number of carbon credits we're generating, in what market, what are they worth, how do we monetize them? And so the data acquisition and the integration of all of the power electronics, the batteries, the control systems, and the commercial metrics have become significantly more present reality need, if you want. And so that's why we spent the last 3 years developing software that does exactly that.
I recall, back to Ed and Chris about collecting data on maybe several hundred parameters every second on a boat and trying to get all that data back to a cloud server when that boat is at sea. It's a very, very significant challenge, which they had also highlighted. So interesting thing to work through. From your perspective, Sue, the kinds of systems you're working on, what are the big technical or technological challenges to be still worked on?
The systems work. They do what we need to do. One of the things that we've been trying to do is try to keep it simple. Because you're on the ocean, fewer parts that you have, the fewer complications you have to deal with. So it's really important that when you move into a sector where people are used to doing their own repair and looking after their own vessels and feeling that they have not so much control, but they have an ability to fix some things at sea, that we offer some simplicity for that. So that's important. And because of that, we're using a lot of recognizable components, and it tends to increase the comfort level for the fishers. From a certification side, that's really that's the technological challenge we're at. We have to build systems that are safe. The example I like to give people is that if you're in an electric car and something goes wrong, you can pull over to the side of the road and wait for help. When you're in a boat, you can't pull over to the side of the road. So you've got some different, more dramatic safety considerations. Now, I have been told by fishers that, yeah, well, they all fish together and there's a community and they will rescue each other, so they're not as stressed about that as I would as I would be. But we all recognize that is the big concern. And when you talk to Transport Canada, the very last thing they want to see a crew have to do is to leave the vessel. It's the very absolute last decision that someone should make. So Transport Canada has been pushing the safety standards here. And when you combine them with the safety standards, and I heard the other group were mentioning, the earlier talk was mentioning DNV. So if you're not familiar with DNV, Det Norske Veritas, they are a classification agency. So a lot of people have heard of Lloyd's Register, Bureau Veritas, DNV, they're all the same. They essentially are the original insurance agents for the ocean, and as part of their work, they make sure that the boats and the vessels that they insure meet standards. So those standards are set, and they're quite high because they're insurance-led, right? So if DNV will certify something, then Transport Canada will accept it. So we have to get to a point where we can meet regulations and meet rules that make sense for the size of vessel that we're working with. A lot of the existing rules are intended for ferries and they're intended for ships, and if you were to build to some of the standards that they have, you know, blindly, you would have giant systems that wouldn't fit on these vessels. So we have to be very careful with that, and we've done it. We've found all the safety rules and standards through the IEC, through the IEEE, ABYC. There's all sorts of different organizations putting out standards that we are using to build a plan that is safe. And Transport Canada has brought together all of their electrical inspectors from across the country to evaluate what could be the path forward for this size vessel. So between all of us, we're all pushing it, and I suspect that we will see some progress in the next year or so. I know that they plan to send out some documentation for industry feedback in the next month or two, and I think that will make a really big difference, because people might not realize that for some of these large systems, if you're using 400 volts or 800 volts, just the fuses and switches that you need for those could be $5,000 to $12,000 a pop, and then that starts to impact the financial viability of one of these kits. And we need them. We need to bring these emissions down. There's no other choice here. We have an excessive amount of emissions, and this is a big source of them in the ocean. So.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm glad to be reminded of just the size and cost of fuses and switches when you're working at 500 or 800 volts on a small vessel.
Yeah.
It's certainly not normal to be working over 240 volts on a small fishing vessel. So there's a whole different angle on the safety, the certifications, who can do the work, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good reminder. And actually, this is great. Kind of generating discussion because it relates to a question that someone has, the part relating to the challenges around safety or making sure that certifications are all correct. An audience member has asked, and I think this one is back to Brent, with the swappable batteries and storing them at a swapping station. So you're concentrating a bunch of batteries together, very high voltages. What sort of regulations and safety considerations have you gone through there? And is there anything that still kind of is a barrier in terms of safety conditions or regulations on those kinds of systems, with respect specifically to the swappable batteries?
Yeah, no, from a safety perspective, there's absolutely no risk in that regard at all. And in our case, our batteries are liquid cooled. I'd argue with Chris and Ed that ours are the safest in the world because they simply can't go into thermal runaway and they can't catch fire and et cetera. They're very stable and very safe platform. But the issue you're dealing with there is the regulatory authorities. And so shipborne batteries are all driven by the standards that are either managed or overseen by the type approval agencies. The inland waterways vessels have a different standard that we work to, but frankly, the offshore standard is harder, so that we've achieved that makes the inshore more of a bureaucratic adventure than having to requalify the batteries. The land-based storage hasn't proven to be a barrier for us at all. So we're building 12 of the power swap stations in the Netherlands this year for the ability to lift batteries on and off of the ships and be able to operate them in that regard. And the regulatory authorities have been not easy to work with and simple, but have certainly been proactively supporting us in terms of helping us to help them understand what the risks and the regulations need to be, because we're all moving into fairly blue territory here. There aren't a lot of standards that exist that apply, which is also the reason why entities like Transport Canada, it's unfamiliar territory for them, and they have to put their name on it and validate that they're saying these things are safe to operate, whether it's a ship or whatever the application may be. So they're taking a risk without having necessarily the expertise that some of us in the industry have developed. And part of our job then is to help them gain that knowledge and expertise and work with them side by side effectively to help clarify and manage the risks of an installation, because nobody wants to build anything that's not safe. Nobody wants to build anything where people can get hurt servicing the product and dealing with upwards of 1,000 volts DC. If you're exposed to that as a service technician, extraordinarily dangerous. So we've gone to great lengths and additional costs to make sure that when the batteries are in service, there is no voltage or power at the terminals, so people can't get hurt. More than anything else. And I think what you're going to see is, as the regulators become more knowledgeable, you'll see that they actually drive the type approval agencies to further improve the safety standards, because it only takes one bad accident or one person getting killed to completely stop an entire industry. We all saw this when the Boeing 787 had lithium battery fires in it during its inaugural launch. It delayed the deployment of those aircraft by almost a year and a half and cost Boeing and the battery company GS Yuasa well over $500 million to regain the confidence of the market that they were safe to fly on. So safety and risk management are paramount, and the authorities should be difficult to work with. They should make it hard for us, because we all owe the accountability to people who use our vessels to the accumulated standards that we all come together with.
Thank you. Turning to the fact that this is the EnergyDATA Workshop, and looking at data, I got a pair of questions that relate to data that pertains to this sector that you may have been collecting. And I'll go back to Sue first with this. Could you explain a data set from your work, some form of data that you've collected that highlights how hybrid or electric vessels can reduce carbon emissions?
Oh, we have a lot of that data. So we've been collecting data is a big part of what we do. And to collect that data, we developed a portable system. So when we first started looking at collecting data, putting strain gauges on shaft sensors and collecting different pieces of data, the only place you could really get it done easily was with a group like NRC, where you're bringing a lot of scientists out for the day, and it could get very, very expensive. So what we did is we built a system that allows us to pull in torque and RPM, so we got power from the shaft, and having the shaft power is great because you don't have to worry about all the losses through the system. We have high quality GPS, so that we have much better than a lot of the systems that are out there. We have a very high quality one. We have an IMU, so that's basically your movement of the vessel that we collect. So your pitch, yaw, roll. And then we also have a wind anemometer where we collect data. We've collected sound data. We've collected emissions data. So for most of our system, it's independent. We can install it on a vessel, and then we can just leave it there and come back in a week, or swap out batteries so that we can take a full month's worth of data. And so that really gets us an understanding of the operations of the vessel, what they do and how much power they use, why are they slowing down, why are they speeding up. And when you combine that with interviews with the operators, you really get a sense of how is power being used on this boat. And then for the emissions testing, we do need a person to stand there with a probe in the exhaust. Well, they don't actually hold it, but they have to make sure that it's safe. So we have done many vessels where we've collected that emissions data. And what we've done is we've correlated all of the data together. So we can tell you when you're operating at 80 kilowatts what your emissions are, and how does that change when you're operating at 80 kilowatts and your speed is slowed down, but you're still pushing because you've got a heavy vessel or something, right? So we've got we've got a lot of different scenarios that we have studied, and we're going to be publishing some of that information in the very near future. And when we converted the Aluta-C, we completed a before and after study. And so that allowed us, we took the subsea noise data, we took the emissions data, and we took all the powering data, and then we were able to say afterwards, once we converted to electric, exactly how much we were changing. I don't know if you want me to go on too much about this, but I will say that the big surprise for us was that the local emissions were much more intense than we expected. So by local emissions, so we all know CO2, you just use fuel as a proxy, and that gives us a CO2 number. But when we start talking about things like hydrocarbons, NOx, NO, CO, we found the hydrocarbon numbers really orders of magnitude higher than what you'd expect from a vehicle on land, an equivalent vehicle. And that gets us into methane. Methane, people will say, well, it's a short-acting greenhouse gas. Well, it doesn't matter if it's short-acting if it's going in there continuously. So yeah. It's a problem, and we believe we've identified something that's quite serious that we have to really consider. There haven't been options in the ocean space for these vessels to improve this. That is like blaming people for putting out exhaust emissions before catalytic converters were available, right? So if the technology is available and they're required to have it, then yes, we can start starting looking why this is happening. But at this point, the reason it's happening is because the regulations haven't been there, and we need to build regulatory systems to drive change in the environment. And once we do that, then that opens up the door as well to more electrification.
That was actually one of the related questions. So since we're on that thread, is what have you found that was maybe surprising, like, oh, it wasn't quite expecting that, or that you would say has the most impact from the data that you've been collecting?
So when we think about the boats that we're looking at, the fishing boats, for the most part, people are outside on the deck working in an outside atmosphere. When they're traveling at high speeds, the emissions will be blowing through the exhaust and away from them. So there's not really a big impact on the people working. But when they slow down and they're working on hauling pots, and they're a lot of wind here in case
door
people are
just
hearing
blew
that
open
noise.
again.
It's crazy. So when they slow down and they're working on their decks, and the boat is in idle or it's moving at very low speeds, and it's a foggy day, those emissions are going to come down into the space. So we were really amazed at just the types of emissions and the size, the amounts of emissions compared to what would be the occupational health and safety rules or the expected from a land vehicle. And we're just not sure that people were quite aware of how significant this was. Yeah. The other thing is the noise. We were amazed at what a difference the noise made. That was fantastic. It was incredible to see that noise pressure just come down. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, we hadn't talked about noise yet, but I understand that's one of the big benefits of electrifying a vessel is when it's operating on electric, it can greatly reduce the noise. So it's good that you have that data on that. And I'm just recalling personal experience being on various ships, even including the ferry that goes across the harbor. And if you're downwind, if the wind's there's not much wind and you're going a certain direction, you can really smell the exhaust emissions.
Yeah.
So that's an important factor. So I'll turn that one over to Brent also. So some data that you've been collecting and maybe something that you found that was either surprising or really influenced how you approach your work.
Well, interestingly enough, in the last year, we've been involved in several real case studies on short sea and blue water vessels. And I think Sue's conclusion would translate up through the entire fleet. So on the one thing, they were only collecting data 1 minute a day at noon sightings because they only saw that as relevant data to the location of the vessel, how is it meeting its commercial obligations. So when we started actually converting the power management systems to be able to record all of the power data on board, we started to get a significantly different picture of how could we add energy storage into this. And then very similar to Sue's results, the emissions of the vessel's engines, which are always measured against their commissioning date testing when they're issued, were significantly different at different modes of operation and age of the machinery and equipment. So that's really where we've been principally focused on, is collecting in power and energy information so that we can actually size energy storage systems. Historically, we built a fishing boat in Norway a few years ago, and the difference in operation of being on board that boat when it was running electric versus diesel, just in terms of vibration and fumes, it was incredibly impactful. I fished that boat for 12-hour days, and you got off the boat feeling much fresher and less stressed and exhausted when it was electric and you didn't deal with the vibration and the smoke than you did in a typical vessel, which by the end of the day, you can almost be physically ill from having had the diesel fumes just roll back over the aft deck while you're working. So that data I haven't collected. I think Sue's done a lot more on that side of the fence, but the whole context of data collection is one of the most important things. And I think, again, Sue made a very good connection when she said legislators can't define unless they know. And they don't need hypothetical information. They need hard, real information. And I think once people start to actually understand, as these surveys and studies come to light over the next couple of years, just how much more impactful to the environment the marine industry is, it will accelerate the conversion, the opportunity, and the relativity of things like legislation to making all of this electric. I mean, from our perspective, this isn't something you can think about doing and plan on over the next 10 or 12 years. This is something that globally we need to do now in every aspect, in every industry. And it's compelling and it's urgent, and it needs all of our attention if we're really going to look at preserving the status quo of this planet into something our kids can inherit and our grandkids can inherit.
Thank you. And speaking to that urgency, we have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to fit in one more question on a quite different topic. The need for charging infrastructure at shore, at docks, wharfs, etc. You know, the urgency of that. We've got electric boats already here at Cove and going to arrive at Cove. How are they even going to get charged? And there's going to be thousands of them in the near future. I guess briefly, and this time I'll go the other direction, so Brent first and then Sue. What do you see as the need for and potential of shore-based charging infrastructure, and how best to implement it? Brent first.
The need for charging is the accelerator or the stagnation point for the electrification of these fleets. We're needing an entire global infrastructure to be developed and implemented now. And it's not just about having charging infrastructure. It's one thing to run a pipe of energy to a port or a dock or anything, but if that energy is being generated by coal, then you haven't completely defeated the purpose because you are reducing the net, but you have kind of defeated the purpose in that you're not really measuring the problem yet. So this is where the embrace of renewables, which thankfully have come down in cost significantly in the last 10 years, to be incorporated into that charging infrastructure is absolutely mission critical. We need to take better advantage of geothermal capabilities for generating energy. We need to look at managing every aspect of energy creation as something that takes advantage of what the sun and the atmosphere produce every day, whether it's wind or solar, or something like geothermal, and incorporate them in a ruggedized grid structure that probably is going to be a microgrid structure, and understand that we have that available energy to serve those needs without putting a lot of caps on capability, because we're trying to manage with a grid structure that has completely outgrown its purpose, that exists not only in Canada, but quite literally around the world. So we need to do it now, and it needs to be done in parallel with the development of converting these ships and applications to electric. And that's, again, when power swap, for us, that's part and parcel. We're building the charging stations that are all being supported by as close to zero emission technology today as we can. And then as time goes on, we're developing our own resources on the renewable side to be able to service our customers' needs. And if we don't, then we don't have a business. So I would say very urgent for everybody.
Very clear. And last word to Sue, with a 30 seconds worth left. We see the great need, but is there a benefit and an opportunity to the grid of all of this new charging infrastructure and all of these electric boats?
Absolutely. As Brent was mentioning earlier, the amount of time that a vessel is used is going to give you your payback. So we are building vessel to grid opportunities. So that way, when you buy this battery or lease this battery, or whatever the situation is, that you are using the battery, which is the highest cost of the piece and the piece that's going to wear and tear the soonest. Electric motors can last 25 years, so we know when you buy that, you're good for a long, long time. But if you're going to be buying the battery, using it for vessel to grid, dynamic stabilization of the grid, peak management, micro peak management, all of these factors are of huge value to utilities. So we've spent a lot of time talking to utilities about partnering with them when we build projects. So that's one of the reasons that we've come to the conclusion that we want to build 10 boat projects every time we build a project now, because then we can offer onshore charging at the same time, and then that's done in partnership with the local utility. So those are the projects that we're working on to try and ensure that we have the best use of the assets that we have available. Because if we're going to be in seasonal environments like a lot of the Canadian system, where people could be on the water for 100 days a year, or they might go out for 200 days a year, but there's a significant portion of time where they will not be using it. So if we can use that battery for grid management, it becomes a really valuable resource. So that's the piece that, I guess that's our secret sauce that we're trying to make happen with utilities. We are making happening with utilities right now.
Yeah, that's great. So there's value to that battery even when the boat is not in use, but it's connected to a charger.
Exactly.
So that's fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I just allowed us to go a couple minutes over on this panel, but I think very exciting discussion. So first of all, thank you very much, Stu and Brent, and we'll look forward to talking and working on things together going forward.
Thank you very much for having me.
Everybody, very much appreciate the time, Mike.
So next up for us is very exciting representation from our students, from NSC, Nova Scotia Community College students in ocean technology, who have prepared pitch videos, which I'm hoping someone on the team has queued up ready to play. Okay, go for it.
Hi, my name's Lauren, and with Kim and Alex, we're studying saunabots. Saunabots are reusable sauna buoys. Sauna buoys were originally designed to detect submarines. However, more recently, whale researchers have been using it to detect baleen whale acoustics.
Hi, my name is Kim, and sauna buoys are disposable systems, which means after a certain time frame, they'll scuttle to the ocean floor and contribute to ocean trash, which is undesirable for research purposes, such as studying whales. So to combat this, a researcher at Dalhousie University converted a sonobuoy into a reusable system and termed it the Sonobot. And though his prototype was rudimentary, there was many ways to improve upon it, which is our project.
Hi, I'm Alex, and part of the improvements that we've made to the Sonobot system are incorporating a reusable battery into the unit, and we've also built this battery chassis to help safely store the battery and make it waterproof. We've also done several testings on the electronic components, and we're almost finished the housing and going to begin water tests pretty soon.
Hi, my name is Matt, and with my partner Robin, we are building a marine weather buoy, which is capable of measuring the wave height, wind speed, and wind direction. We were given two damaged models, and we were trying to configure it and come to understand how it works, and then trying to put it together to get a working model to further our understanding in building a device like this.
Hi, my name is Fred. With my colleague Isha, we've partnered up with David Delaurier, a researcher from UQAR to develop an in-situ respirometer. A respirometer is a tool used to measure respiration rate of different organisms. It works by putting an organism in a closed vessel and measuring the oxygen level in that vessel. What's different about our respirometer is it's made to be deployed on the seafloor. It is so that we reduce the stress induced on that organism by not having to bring it back to the lab. Our system works with a trap system inspired from Niskin bottle. It is triggered with an electromagnet from the surface using a camera system.
Hi, my name is Joshua Becker, and with my partner Emilio Rosero, we will be presenting our final project. With our industry partner Integra-C, who has developed an early biological warning system using live mussels, they're only able to monitor the mussels during the day. So we have developed an infrared lighting system able to monitor the mussels during low light hours.
Our Marine Canary infrared camera system is made of a Raspberry Pi infrared camera. It's basically a normal camera without the infrared filter. That allows us to see what we are trying to eliminate here with the infrared lights, which are basically two underwater normal lights that were adapted by changing the LED heads with infrared LEDs. We have an all amphibical underwater camera housing, and we built this frame where we can put the whole system with the popsicle sticks where we're gonna paste and put here the mussels so we can monitor them during low light hours.
All right. Thank you to the NSCC Ocean Technology students for the pitches. I hope that, that you all enjoyed that contribution from our students. We're moving in now to our next panel, and I'm excited to say we have 3 people for our next panel, one of whom is here in the room in person, and 2 coming in online. So I'll briefly introduce, but I will leave it to them in the first question to describe what it is that they're working on. The topic for this panel is hydrogen fuel for vessels. And as you'll see, we have a diversity represented in terms of how hydrogen can be used in vessels, which I'm quite excited about. And our 3 panelists, I guess starting with Paul Jamer, who's here in the room with Breakwater Group. And I see, looks successfully joined online, is Jason Aspen with Aspen Kemp & Associates. So welcome. And Dr. Dan Pierce from CMB Tech, also joining online. So looks like everyone has been able to join us. So I'll begin with, the first question is really quite introductory. Can you summarize in a couple of minutes what it is that your company is working on in this space? give the audience a sense for where you're coming from. I'll start here with Paul.
Good morning, everyone. So Breakwater has been involved in the development and marketing of energy efficient or green technologies, as they're referred to, for the marine industry since its inception. And prior to forming Breakwater, myself and others actually that will be speaking today, Jason Aspen, we worked together to develop the world's first hybrid propulsion system. And Jason, believe it or not, that's been about 15 years ago that we were doing that work. So it's been a few days for sure. Subsequent to that, we and others have delivered a number of systems to the industry. They're installed and actively working on vessels. And that was one of the things that we had to work with, is that these weren't going to be science projects for us. They had to go on to working vessels and be working right away. So throughout the years, the use of alternate propulsion arrangements and alternative fuels has developed from being a real novelty when we first started to now almost everybody has a system either built or in development. So hydrogen, obviously, its profile is rising as a potential clean fuel for vessels. And I'll start by saying I'm not an expert in hydrogen at all. It's just on the marine application of it that I've started to do some work. So a number of our clients are actively developing hydrogen concepts. Not typically, so far, are we hearing about people that want to do 100% hydrogen for their propulsion and power generation on ships. We're mostly seeing people that would like to incorporate a fuel cell and use that to deliver some portion of their energy on board. The technology to achieve this has been maturing steadily, and we believe that the fuel cells and the ancillary equipment that go with it, they're reaching the ability to be prime time and usable on vessels. Certainly the feedback we're hearing from clients is that they're concerned about the overall systems costs and the availability and price of hydrogen. So as we know, there's a few different ways of producing hydrogen, and our clients are aware of that, if you're using hydrocarbons and to produce hydrogen from hydrocarbons, then that's maybe not the end result, but it may be an interim step. So just to set the stage from what we're hearing from our clients, the key questions that they're asking are, is it safe and reliable? What's the life cycle costs and maintenance look like? What's going to be the cost and availability of hydrogen? Certainly here on the East Coast, we're challenged with that. And finally, is there going to be a requirement for specialized technicians on board the vessels in order to be able to incorporate that into the vessel's systems?
All right, thank you. And I'll turn next to Jason. Just give an intro to what Aspen Kemp and Associates is doing in this field. We can't hear you. Maybe you're on mute. Still on mute. Still can't hear you.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. Apologize. I promised myself I'd never be one of those guys doing a Zoom call in the car, but here I am. Anyway, our company is focused for the last 25 years on delivering systems that are more reliable and reduce emissions and save on operating costs. So as Paul had mentioned, we were one of the first companies into the hybrid side of things, and we've been very much focused on the electrification of the marine industry over the last 20 to 25 years. So hydrogen is a natural spot for us to go. We've been doing quite a bit of work on it over the last few years. We see a lot of increased interest in it in the market. Currently, we have a cruise ship that is looking at being able to utilize hydrogen for alongside activities and reduce their carbon footprint when they're in port. Also looking at being able to do some activities in fjords and whatnot in places where there's a sensitivity to the emissions or an additional sensitivity. We've got a 30 to 40 person passenger ferry project that we're working on that's going to be completely hydrogen. Also, we've set up our shop and our test bay hydrogen infrastructure. So we've got an electrolyzer, storage, and also fuel cells. We're working under contract for a microgrid solution in Summerside right now, where we're going to have a megawatt of hydrogen production, and that's going to include a hydrogen refueling station. It's not a marine application, but it could be developed further into that after we start our production. And basically, as a systems energy integrator, we think that hydrogen is a big part of the future. As Paul mentioned, there's many sources of hydrogen, and green hydrogen is definitely the way that we want to go, although there's very little of it in industry right now. But we do see as renewables increase and we get towards our pathway to net zero, that there will be more and more curtailment of green energy, and that curtailment needs to be used somewhere, or it's best if it's used somewhere. So we see that hydrogen is a great fit there to produce green energy during the time when the load is lower and the production's higher. So yeah, that's a quick snapshot for what we're doing right now in this space.
Thank you. And then I'll move to Dan at CMB Tech.
Good morning, everyone. So I think the first point to make is that CMB Tech working on dual fuel engines primarily. So they're the ones I'm going to talk about first. So when I say dual fuel, I actually mean diesel hydrogen dual fuel. So it looks exactly like your classic kind of diesel engine, but we're co-burning with hydrogen. So at the moment we have a number of vessels out on the water. We've got the HydroCat, which is made by Windcat Workboats. This is a dual fuel hydrogen diesel crew transfer vessel for wind farm support. The HydroCat is running two V12 750 kilowatt engines with a total onboard storage of about 200 kilograms, and the use case for that means that's a daily refuel basically. We are in development for a tugboat, which is built but not quite on the water yet. It's also a dual fuel ship, substantially bigger though. This has two of our B Hydro dual fuel V12 engines. So these are IMO Tier 3 at 2 megawatts each. And that hydro tug has 400 kilograms of hydrogen on board, and that's another use case with a kind of daily refueling at that size. We also have the Hydro Bingo, which is a passenger ferry operating out of Japan. That's an 80 passenger ferry. It has two 740 kilowatt engines, which have been converted to run hydrogen dual fuel, and that's been operating for about a year and a half now. The kind of interesting point with that one is that due to the constraints around its use profile and the amount of hydrogen storage, we actually developed a slide on, slide off hydrogen storage tank, so that as the passengers are getting onto the ferry, you can swap out your hydrogen tank for a fresh one, and it's ready to go in the same time that it takes to load the passengers. So that's a kind of interesting feature on that one. The other point, which I don't think we're going to get into too much, but we are also in serious development for larger deep sea vessels, bulk containers, looking at hydrogen and or ammonia hydrogen systems, because we feel that ammonia as a hydrogen carrier may be a better option for some of those larger vessels. And in support of that, we operate our own 1.2 megawatt electrolyzer from our Antwerp facility. That's producing 400 kilos of hydrogen a day. That is able to then simultaneously fuel ships on one side, and it's able to fuel either portside equipment or vehicles or buses on the other side. And we really feel that's kind of a good model going forward in terms of having the infrastructure and having the demand to use that infrastructure.
Thank you. Thanks to all our panelists for the introduction. I'm just going to take a quick moment, because we have a very diverse audience, and just give a word about hydrogen itself, because several folks have mentioned like the sources of where it comes from and so on. hydrogen as a fuel, H2, it's a gas. Obviously, there's all kinds of operating questions around working with that. Also, in that form, molecular form, it's not that readily available. It's mostly bound up in water or hydrocarbons or so on. So it has to be produced, extracted from those. And various folks have mentioned the green hydrogen and so on. Hydrogen comes in all kinds of different colors. And typically green, I mean, obviously it's a colorless gas. It doesn't really have a color. But when people say green, they typically mean that is produced in a way that does not result in any carbon emissions. So, you know, if you were to, probably the premier example is if you use some surplus renewable electricity, which Jason mentioned, use that to electrolyze water, make hydrogen gas. There you go. You've got a fuel that doesn't have any emissions associated with it, either from its production or from its use. So it's a bit of a holy grail, of course. And this leads to kind of my first question to folks. Not very little of the hydrogen that is produced globally can be classified as green today. The vast bulk is from steam reformation of natural gas, and then the question is whether you are able to store the carbon from that reformation process. Most operations do not. So most hydrogen available today is not green. Dan is give a great example of the facility in Antwerp where they are producing hydrogen that is presumably at least as green as the electricity available in Antwerp. So that leads to kind of my first question. Maybe I'll then start with Dan since you're producing it, and then anyone else who wants to chime in. What's your thoughts on, you know, being able to produce the amount of hydrogen that will be needed to supply vessels in a way that does not that decreases rather than increases our greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think it's a really good point, actually. So our Antwerp facility, obviously, we would like to be using 100% green electricity, but that is dependent upon the grid. There are a couple of other cases in terms of hydrogen production. So, for example, it's actually a waste product from chlorate and chloralkali plants, which make bleach and similar products. At the moment, that waste hydrogen is typically vented because it's not worth the cost to compress it, clean it, transport it. So I think there's a good use case there to start using that and harness that. There's also a significant portion of hydrogen currently going into fertilizer production and associated parts for steel refining, food industry, and so on. So I think there's a whole range of hydrogen methods, but the key point is to commercialize them in a way that supports the infrastructure. And so, we see things like, relatively small scale hydrogen production at the point of use, at the port, at the facility as being one good example. But equally, that's not going to really scale up for your larger size vessels. And so, things like your existing ammonia production facility, which ammonia is typically carried in bulk on ships and is not a big issue in terms of having large facilities close to ports and so on. We see that as potentially being a better hydrogen vector, let's say.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense to me operationally for larger vessels, the ammonia as a way of carrying the hydrogen. So, yeah, does anyone want to add, I guess Jason or Paul, on the sources of hydrogen as you see it? And I recall you mentioned that you're involved in a project where it will be produced in Summerside, Prince Edward Island, so that sounds like a good start as well.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Mike. So in Summerside, we're planning on using hydrogen directly, but so we were looking at converting some of the transportation infrastructure and commercial vehicles, also marine vehicles, and then the agricultural sector, which are the three main sources of emissions in PEI that that we're able to change and have an impact on with the hydrogen infrastructure that we're talking about. But also we're working closely with our partner MAN, and they've invested a lot in this technology. So as Dan had mentioned, I think for larger vessels, we're looking at using ammonia as a carrier, and MAN is focusing their development for the large engines on ammonia, but they're also investing significantly in hydrogen directly as well. They also are looking at liquefaction and carrying hydrogen as liquid fuel. There's been lots of work done on the LNG side to where we're getting down to temperatures around minus 150 or minus 170, and with hydrogen, I think you're down around minus 250 degrees Celsius. So the technology exists for that. The viability of it from a commercial aspect is something that needs to still have quite a bit of work done. But as this becomes more mainstream, the prices are going to get pushed down, and we're looking forward to that as far as a way to be able to implement hydrogen in these various systems. But essentially, near-shore vessels are probably going to be able to use hydrogen directly, either in small engines, in reciprocating engines, or in fuel cells. And the larger vessels are probably going to be more along the lines of ammonia.
Thank you. So kind of moving into how the hydrogen is used on the vessel. And just to kind of set the understanding for folks, I guess I'll throw this out to whichever folks want to respond to it. We've heard already several ways mentioned, so used co-fuel in an engine. The fuel cells have been mentioned. Would one of our panelists be willing to just explain at a basic level the difference between how you can use hydrogen in vessels, and what the vessel operating characteristics or sizes of vessels that might be better for those different ways of using it?
I can start with that if you'd like
to. Okay. Paul will start.
Yeah. So the ones that we've been exposed to most are folks that are looking for that initial step. They use the phrases from hull to wake and well to wake for the various different fuels. So hydrogen's got an advantage in that the hull to wake can be low emission. Yeah. So the people that we're seeing now mostly are asking about the adoption of fuel cells as a means of not, like I said earlier, not providing all of their propulsion and power gen requirements, but being used as a portion of it. And so there's some advantages to an approach like that, using it on a vessel. A lot of the systems that we're starting to see mature now are containerized, so they're modular. So you can have your actual fuel cell delivered in a container, a 20-foot container, and you can have the fuel for it in other containers, and there can be spare fuel containers on the wharf waiting for the next time they're in when you swap those out with quick connects and so on. So that's one of the ways that we see a lot of interest, at least, on using the hydrogen on board and using it. So that the actual getting of the development of technologies for getting green hydrogen are the key parts, getting that well-to-hull part solved.
Well, I think that's an important distinction. If your purpose is to drive the vessel, then you could use the hydrogen in an engine that drives the vessel. Yeah. But a lot of vessels, particularly larger, and depending what kind they are, have very large electrical loads on board the vessel. Right. And a fuel cell obviously produces electricity, so that would be a way to cover those loads, plus perhaps some of the backup propulsion and so on. Right. Anyone else want to chime in on maybe Dan looks ready to say something.
Yeah, thanks. The comments I would make there is we would absolutely see that there's a place for fuel cells. I want to put that out there first, just in case people think we're totally combustion characters. But it's about understanding the characteristics between those. So to give you an example, obviously there's your typical fuel cell doesn't have a particularly high heat output. So for vessels where you can actually use your propulsion system as a combined heat and power, then your hydrogen combustion engines, be they dual fuel or hydrogen monofuel, it can have significant performance improvements because their thermal efficiency, because you're now taking that heat away to use for other onboard ship systems, mean I think they're very competitive in terms of fuel cells. And when you look at overall energy efficiency, the profile for fuel cells typically is that they are have higher efficiencies at lower loads, which is almost the inverse of your typical combustion engines. So in that sense, I think it's all about matching up your application profile to the either the propulsion system or the auxiliary load system. And there's places where those are very naturally together and synergistic between the fuel cells and hydrogen combustion.
Great, thank you. Jason, did you want to add anything on that topic?
No, I think that I'm good there. I do think there's no silver bullet. There's going to be a mix of the various technologies that are available as we go forward, and it really depends on the application. What's the best solution for that application? But there are a variety of methods of using hydrogen to provide energy for these applications, and there's not just one that will work in all applications for sure.
All right, thank you. Turning to the title of our whole day today, Energy Data. So we always ask a question about data. And I'll just do this in a round. Can you describe for us some data that you have collected that demonstrates the benefit of using hydrogen in the marine sector? I'll just go the round. The order I see in front of me here is Dan is on the screen, and then Jason, and then Paul.
Sure. So we have been collecting data on all of our vessels for some time. So I guess the one I would talk about first is the Hydro Bingo, the Japan ferry. We did some initial feasibility work, and we looked at that in terms of the tank size and the refueling times and so on. And that we did some then proof of concept builds and so on. Collecting the data from that really showed that having the kind of classical tank layout with refueling hoses and so on wasn't really going to work in this application, and that's why we moved to a roll-on, roll-off tank solution. Obviously, I'm not going to share the data we collected from that, but I think that's a good example of not only doing the paper studies beforehand, but actually collecting real-world data, going out, trying out some things on the vessel, and then really exploring what can and can't be done. Because I think the technology level is actually quite mature, and most of the problem is infrastructure or so on, rather than having to do deep level data dives from our point of view anyway.
Great, thank you. Turning to Jason.
Thanks, Mike. For our side, we don't have an operational hydrogen-powered vessel on the water yet. That'll be later on this year. But basically, we have been collecting a lot of data on vessels over the last 25 years as a company, and really that is the key to successfully implementing any type of technology, is understanding the application deeply and being able to apply the best solution. So an example would be we look at a 50 megawatt power plant on an offshore asset, and with 6-8 megawatt thrusters, and you'd think if you want to have a clean way of powering those thrusters, you need to have 8 megawatts for each thruster as far as energy storage, if you're looking at energy storage. But if you look at the data, you can find out that actually 95% of the time, that whole power plant operates at about 10% of its rated power. And by looking at these sorts of things over time, you're really able to optimize the system and optimize the capex, and then get to a solution that actually has a reasonable payback time. So we were able to use a green source of energy for 95% of the time, and then the last 5% you're running diesels, multiple diesels. That whereas what we did was apply energy, static rotating reserve, so that basically we could increase the efficiency of the operating engines and go down to a single generator operation. So those sorts of things, data is key to actually understanding how to build the best system possible. And it's the same for hydrogen, to understand where hydrogen makes sense. And in this transition, it's important to understand the data intimately.
Thank you. Paul, do you want to add?
Yeah, just most of the information, the data that we've seen so far hasn't been the result of real-world applications of the technology. Mostly what we've seen is desktop studies that say if we displace the requirement to use this much diesel to create that electricity for this or whatever, or we displace this much diesel by burning it in a dual fuel situation, that this is the emission savings that we're going to encounter. But again, almost none of the studies that we've seen or the work that we've seen done has incorporated everything before the hull. It's just talking about use on board at point of consumption. That's it.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay, great. I noted a couple of things that I thought were super interesting from that round. One is I love your discovery to make the roll-on, roll-off tanks. It's so similar in a way to earlier we had Brent Perry with Shift Clean Energy battery packs that can be taken on and off the vessel so that it gives you more time to recharge them. So just, yeah, really interesting, innovative development. And then that real operational data showing that only 10% of the rated power is really being used for most of the time. Very, very important, obviously, in being able to make an affordable system instead of sizing one that can make 100% of the power all of the time. So thank you for explaining those things. I meant to remind folks in the audience, certainly welcome to, invited to, encouraged to send questions. Send questions in the chat, and Jacob in the background is texting them to me, and some of them are coming in. So this is a question from the audience that we've touched on a little bit, but maybe to explore it a little bit deeper. And it's, for better or for worse, it's before you get to the hull of the vessel. Someone in the audience asking, how do you evaluate the carbon dioxide emissions of hydrogen as a fuel supply? To be classified as clean hydrogen, it would have to meet a fairly strict standard as to the life cycle emissions from it. Do you know of maybe a good system out there or a standard that you can calculate and assure yourself that you know how clean hydrogen is that you're supplying? I don't know if anyone has. I'll throw that out to anyone.
I'll just start with in Jason's instance. I believe, Jason, you're planning on using renewables in Summerside to do that. So, he's intimately involved with it from the creation of the hydrogen to the use of it. So that's one way of securing that. But I don't think that there's any easy ways to know that if you're getting it from some industrial source, that you're going to be able to get it 100% green, unless there is some kind of a regulatory body overlooking all of the processes involved with that. So use at site, I think Dan mentioned as well, is having something that's generating the hydrogen for you right at the site where the vessels come in is a good way to do that.
Yeah, you'd almost have to calculate it in every instance. What's the source of how the hydrogen is being generated? Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
No, I was just going to say that, in general, the qualifications are green and blue and then brown, as you go down the scale. But, and that's qualified at the source. Of course, how you get the hydrogen to the load or the consumer can be a variety of methods that can be green or not green. However, I mean, what I love about the marine application is that when we start talking about applications like offshore wind and whatnot, you're floating on your fuel. So you know, you can be. I see in those sorts of scenarios producing hydrogen right at the source where we're generating green energy. And as Paul mentioned in our Summerside one, is very easy to be confident that the hydrogen is very green because we're producing it right from solar. But of course, the solar panels that we're producing the energy from also have their own carbon footprint associated with them. So it's a complicated supply chain, I guess, and qualifying hydrogen as 100% green isn't really a simple thing, but we've got to make the transition, and as we do this transition thing, the hydrogen will become greener and greener.
And Dan, do you want to add anything?
No, I think my fellow panelists have handled it really well, actually. I was just going to echo kind of what Jason was saying in that I think local production of hydrogen or local production potentially of ammonia at the wind farm, either fixed or floating in the deep offshore, are both potentially very viable solutions in terms of totally green hydrogen. Again, notwithstanding the carbon costs of producing the wind farm in the first place. And certainly, you know, you could see either a pipeline to shore or offloading onto your ship, the hydrogen or the ammonia, as a really interesting way to guarantee you are getting as green as possible, and then using the unloaded hydrogen or ammonia as your propulsion source on that work vessel seems to make a really good case.
I think that's some really interesting ideas brought up. People are aware there's an enormous potential to generate offshore wind energy that is currently untapped. And in many cases, some of that potential may be distant from a ready electricity market and a cable. You could even envision that purpose of that wind farm being to produce hydrogen for offshore fueling of vessels. Yeah, lots of really interesting possibilities here. And it reminds me of another discussion I was in where, as Jason mentioned, all these different colors of hydrogen were mentioned. Some folks advocating to stop using the colors because they kind of can get confusing, like what does green really mean, or what's brown, or so on. I won't sort of weigh in either way on that, but what was suggested in that room was that hydrogen come with an actual numerical rating, which is like, okay, what are the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions or other emissions with this supply of hydrogen, and then your buyer can make a choice. I think, for example, you'd find hydrogen made from steam reformation of natural gas without any carbon capture would be on the high end or less desirable end of that. Obviously, your hydrogen made straight from an offshore wind farm would be on the very desirable end. I think you'd find that the life cycle emissions of that wind farm are very, very small for the amount of energy hydrogen that they can make. So yeah, just an idea to throw out there is maybe hydrogen should come with an actual more quantitative rating of its greenness, if you want to call it that. Turning to a different angle, and this has been mentioned by a couple of our panelists already, but what are we looking at in your view in terms of shore-based infrastructure, or obviously we're now talking about potentially offshore infrastructure, but if we look at shore-based infrastructure, what do you see as needed to be developed in the next 5-10 years to be able to effectively use hydrogen in the marine sector? Any comments on that? And I guess this time I'll go the opposite round. I'll start with Paul and then go to Dan and then Jason.
So the short answer for Eastern Canada is almost everything has to be developed. The underlying technology is in place. It's just a matter of putting it together and producing the hydrogen. So, you know, Dan's talked about ammonia, and so has Jason, and the use of that. But certainly for folks that are just going to use hydrogen in its normal state as hydrogen, you know, a source that can be mobilized on or pumped onto a vessel is the key thing to have, and that infrastructure, as I say, the underlying technology is there, just the source of the gas and the infrastructure to get it to the vessels is problematic. So basically wherever vessels are going to be in and they're going to be stopped for a while, that's your opportunity to put the fuel on board. So all of that has to be developed basically from scratch here in Eastern Canada anyway.
I think I'll kind of add to this question. Are there ports that are moving ahead more quickly? So I was at a discussion about the Port of Halifax, which of course is interested in hydrogen as well. With shipping activity and right in a downtown area, thinking around how you store and supply large quantities of hydrogen if it's in a gas state is a really interesting planning discussion. And I think lots of ports that have an interest in this will be looking at that. So I'll kind of tack that on as well, like what infrastructure do we need, and what ports are thinking ahead on this, let's say. Go ahead, Dan.
Sure. So I've already mentioned, obviously, our port in Antwerp has a facility for production and refueling there. So I won't go into that again. I just wanted to say that in addition to the obvious parts of the infrastructure, like having a local electrolyzer or having a local storage tank and refueling capabilities, there are other solutions that I think would fit very well, particularly in the near to medium term. So, for example, we have a refueling trailer. It's the size of a standard semi, and we have smaller mobile refuelers as well. The mobile refuelers carry something like 600 kilograms. So that's one. It's depending on the size of your vessel. That's at least one full bunkering. That kind of thing we see as an excellent staging point. So people who want to do maybe a proof of concept for their vessel, the infrastructure doesn't exist. You could lease them a refueling trailer and then use that as a stepping stone. That helps them prove their concept out without having huge outlays for infrastructure. But the key point there is you're then able to develop the demand. When the demand is there, then the infrastructure and the operators will follow, because otherwise we're locked into this chicken and egg scenario where we're just starting to see some real positive interest in the hydrogen sector, but people are finding it hard to get traction because of the infrastructure issue. Another potential solution in terms of infrastructure is something like a floating power barge. This is a concept we've been working on. It hasn't been built yet, but that would be capable of either supplying a hotel load directly, or it would be able to refuel vessels from its onboard storage. So we would see that there's a couple of kind of logical stepping stones to get there, and then once there's enough demand, then the infrastructure will start to follow. In regards to the second part of your question, obviously we work in Europe primarily, so I have some knowledge that there's a keen interest in Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, to look at not only the infrastructure locally, but how that interacts with the other port facilities, and that includes things like inland waterways. There's a serious amount of traffic up and down the Rhine, for example. So you can't decarbonize one of your Rhine vessels, for example, without having a whole number of refueling points up and down the river. So we see all those things kind of coming together and trying to build enough momentum to get that infrastructure there in place.
Thank you. Turning to Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think that the other panels hit on most of the things that I would comment on as well, but it is definitely to echo Dan, a chicken and egg sort of thing. But I think it's key that we have early adopters, and the early adopters are going to have to require funding or other incentives to make this happen. I think, and we see some some signs of this. For instance, Germany is at the forefront of adopting hydrogen, I think, and Europe in general are quite ahead of us. But Germany's entered into an agreement with Canada, and that if we have a green supply of hydrogen in Canada or anywhere in the world, I believe that they've put out there that there's a contract that they would sign for 10 years to basically purchase that hydrogen, green hydrogen. So those sorts of initiatives, I think, will go a long way to creating the supply, and then the demand will come. But the demand will probably come with early adopters, such as ferries, where there's an understood route that the infrastructure can be put in place, and the vessel is always going to be in that area of operation. So it's an exciting period of time where we see this, it's the Wild West, I guess, for this right now. But this is what we need to do to be able to have this as a mainstream solution in the future. And the future is not too far away, where I think we will see it as a mainstream solution. We're making commitments to net zero that are relatively aggressive, and there's going to have to be a lot of change over the next decade to accomplish that.
I can just put one more point in.
Sure.
Jason used a phrase that's really important, and that's the early adopters. A lot of the work that we did with Hybrid System in the early days was getting the word out to people and trying to find those operators that were willing to take the risk and take the chance and spend some additional money in order to bring the technology to their fleets. So that's a really critical part of this whole process, is to create the demand by having operators that are willing to adopt it.
Yes. We're coming to the end of our time for this panel, and what I really love about how this is winding up is that we didn't actually get to what I hoped would be the last question, which is, how do you see your work in this looking in 5 years? So that visionary kind of question. But what I love is that in answering this last question about infrastructure, everyone put a vision forward, right? Like, what do we need to do? Where do we need to go to get that infrastructure in place and move the hydrogen fuel sector forward? So it turned out well after all. So thank you very much to everyone involved for joining this panel discussion, and hope to talk with you about these developments and projects going forward. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
See you.
All right, so we are close to on time, and we are moving into our next panel, which will be how is data driving the marine sector, and someone else is moderating the next panel. So we're going to have a little bit of a change of microphone and a little rustling around. So bear with us for just one moment.
Good morning, or yeah, it is morning. Good morning. I'm John Stratton. I'm the program director with CTAC, which is a unit of Nova Scotia Community College. We're focused on helping organizations with ocean technology, both on the development side and the adoption side. And today we're going to talk to a few people about how data is driving the marine sector. So today we have with us Barry Stevens, the president of 3D Wave Design online. Good morning. Matthew Garvin, also online. Matthew's a team lead at the National Research Council in St. John's, Newfoundland at the Ocean, Coastal and River Engineering Research Center. Dr. Tim Webster, who's a team lead and research scientist at Nova Scotia Community College's Applied Geomatics Research Group. And Jennifer LaPlante, who's the executive director of DeepSense. So maybe the first thing to do is I'll ask each of you to summarize in just a minute or so what your company or organization is working on in the data space as it relates to the marine sector. And maybe we'll start with our online guests first and then switch to the studio. So Barry, would you like to start us off there?
Sure. Can you hear me loud and clear?
I can hear you,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is Barry Stevens. I'm a Acadia First Nation member, and I do work with some of the other panelists here. We're all about visualizing climate change and taking some of the science and the data that other people have collected and applying it for communities so they can do climate change adaptation. But with that, we are also working with the University of Victoria to help them communicate alternate energy sources to First Nation communities on the West Coast, including the island of Haida Gwaii. So we're helping, or we want to be seen as part of the solution for the scientists and the researchers to help communicate communities and the public of what needs to happen and what the risks are and that type of thing. And I guess that's it. Thank you.
Great. Let's go to Matthew. Matthew, what is NRC doing in this space?
Well, we're a research organization, so I think it goes without saying that we're pretty enthusiastic about data. At the NRC's entire program devoted to AI for logistics as one example. A lot of their work centers around using big data and advanced data processing techniques to improve the efficiency of supply chains. Part of NRC where I work is really interested in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway corridor. And this links to that supply chain or optimization question at that sort of interface between ships and then terrestrial transportation. But our research also includes predicting flooding, predicting sea ice, developing smarter and more efficient ships, and a lot of other stuff that goes on in the marine sector. All of this work thrives on data. It's not just data from our labs, but it's also data that's collected in the field from an increasing array of deployed sensors. Some of my colleagues that I work closely with, they're really focused on reducing ship fuel consumption and emissions. Increasingly, this work involves collecting data from ships in operation and then using that data to help ship owners improve the operation of their ships. My team specifically is largely concerned with developing technology that supports autonomous ship navigation, specifically in ice. In a nutshell, what we're doing involves collecting data to build estimates of sea ice severity surrounding a ship and then using that data to inform good navigational decision-making. The short-term view on this is that we're looking at ways of displaying that information to people who are operating the ship and making sure that that human and machine interface works well and they can use the information effectively. With a bit of a longer term view, we're also working on developing algorithms and systems that use the ice severity estimates to identify and optimize potential routes. And hopefully one day these algorithms will be able to drive ships with minimal human supervision.
Great, thanks. Jennifer.
Thanks. DeepSense is based out of Dalhousie, and we have great funding from partners like ACOA, the province of Nova Scotia, Cove, IBM, and Ocean Frontier Institute. And our goal is to help ocean sector companies really understand data and hopefully advance towards the world of using artificial intelligence and machine learning to grow. We touch every single vertical within the ocean sector and help people regardless of where their data maturity lies. And we use students. We don't use students. We partner with students, and students are the real contributors. So we really want to help companies grow. but we really want a talent and a pool of students graduating and coming into the ocean sector, and then the data aspect of the ocean sector to really grow this whole sector in general.
Great, thanks. And Tim.
Thanks, John. Good morning. Our group really focuses on mapping and modeling in the coastal zone and coastal processes. We utilize some unique technology, we have a sensor called an airborne topobathymetric LiDAR, so we seamlessly survey the elevation data from the land out into the subtidal environments. Some things we do after that, we use these data for flood risk generation, hydrodynamic modeling, looking at the fate of pollutants, other types of support for aquaculture farming, other applications, things like looking at erosion, so very much at that seam between the land and the ocean in that coastal environment.
Great, thanks. I'd like to talk now about how you all, the methods and techniques that you use to collect data in the marine environment. And I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the challenges of collecting data in the environment and some of the ideas you've come up with to overcome those challenges. And this question is for anyone.
Well, I can
Tim,
start
if you'd
there.
like
I
to-
mean, this sensor I've described, it relies on laser pulses, a green laser pulse to actually see through the water column and survey the sea floor. So as a result, because it's light, we need good water clarity for the instrument to work well. So one of our big challenges is being able to monitor the water clarity before we contract the aircraft to actually fly the survey. So one way we've done to get around that is to deploy real-time turbidity buoys, so we can essentially check the turbidity level prior to flying. And I guess a perhaps lower tech approach is through our years of looking at the data and deploying time series turbidity sensors, is to understand the relationships between the wind speed and direction, wave setup and fetch, and then have a pretty good sense of what the weather prediction is, whether we're going to have onshore waves, and if we do, then we'll probably have turbid conditions. And perhaps more importantly is how many days of calm weather after a wind event will the ocean be clear enough again in order to do the survey. So those are a few of our challenges.
How about anyone else? Matthew, do you have anything to add in terms of data collection challenges?
Yeah, I can definitely pick up from there. I mean, my research really relies on collecting data aboard ships, and I'm specifically interested in looking at sea ice conditions using sensors mounted to a ship. You know, marine environment is always inhospitable at the best of times, but it gets even worse and harsher in the winter when you're dealing with ice and things like that. So every time we put a sensor on a ship, there's always a risk that'll be damaged. And we've developed a whole lot of ways of protecting them, but most of them are very low tech. We're still a long way from long unsupervised deployments of these sensors on ice-going ships. One of the other challenges that we're working with is when it comes to measuring sea ice, no one sensor can provide all of the information that we need to make a good decision about how to navigate through the ice. We want to know all sorts of different physical properties, such as the thickness of the ice, the size of the ice pieces, where the openings are between the ice pieces, things like that. And we need to understand that at different sort of physical and time scales. So for maneuvering on the scale of seconds to minutes, we need to know a lot of very detailed information about the ice that's very near the ship. But then for route planning on the scale of hours or even days, we need to know a little bit less detail, but at a much larger physical and time range. And no one sensor can provide all of this. So we're having to develop strategies to use lots of different sensors, some mounted on the ship, some maybe mounted on drones, even data collected by satellites. And we need to understand which ice properties each sensor can provide and how accurate that data is. And then we're working on developing techniques to fuse all of that data into a final estimate of ice severity that is accurate and robust, so it'll still function if we lose one of the sensors for a period of time. And this is, I think this can be something that keeps me busy for my career anyway.
So let's move on to the next question, and it's about how is data modernizing the marine sector? And again, this question is for anybody and everybody.
I think one thing that is really interesting we're seeing is the fact that you can get more tools in more hands of everyone. So I think we're seeing more crowdsourced data. Someone can take a GoPro and start collecting more data. So I think one of the great things is we're able to collect more information than we might have not have had otherwise. And it appears to me, and I don't have a long history and background in this area like all of you, I'm a data person, but there's an increasing awareness of collaboration and a need to share information. So I think that there's more and more this opportunity for others to label their data and share their data and give access to data that might not have existed before, and that just provides so many more opportunities to analyze and learn more and make better predictions and hopefully better decisions for the long term.
I guess I could follow up on that,
Sure.
especially in the regards to the prediction side. So we're getting, higher resolution models, elevation models, nearshore models of the terrain. So therefore, that leads to improved hydrodynamic modeling for storm surge, flooding, things like that. And on the aquaculture side, having these more detailed maps and models, again, with respect to current speeds, ice, below ice conditions, allow people to better site where they may want to grow oysters, as an example, in the shellfish industry. So all of these data, as you mentioned, I think are improving our decision-making ability.
So now I'd like to talk about the importance of data visualization. And Barry, I know that you have some specific involvement in this area, so I'd like to start with you. And the question is, how can we use data to empower people, to increase public awareness, and to better inform decision makers? So let's start with Barry, and then everyone else feel free to come in as well.
Well, thank you. That's a very important question, and it's very dear to me. I know a lot of scientists out there, and a lot of people are doing incredible research, but a lot of times the decisions are made by non-technical people. So we've taken some of the science and I've worked with Tim Webster's group in the early days. And what we do is we create 3D models that does not require any special computers or any type of special programs. It's basically a WebGL based. And we've incorporated different types of flooding, whether it be fluvial or sea level rise or storm surge. And our latest thing that we've done is 3D fire modeling with the support of Natural Resources Canada. When we give the tools to the decision makers, we're finding that people are actually acting on the science and the data that's been collected because they understand it. We're trying to take away the mystique, because what we've found, whether it be in First Nation communities or non-Indigenous communities, people get the reports, I believe, because they don't have the technical background or don't know what they should do, they decide to do essentially nothing. They get overwhelmed. We've taken some of the reports that have been put together with from academic groups and engineering groups, and immediately we've seen people changing culvert systems, seeking and getting funding for living shoreline projects, changing where some of landfill sites have been. And so we find by democratizing the data and giving it to individual communities, decision makers, land use planners, and the like, we've seen great change. And we're so happy to be proud of that. And it's all because we ingest things like LiDAR, sonar. We've worked with the Force Group in the Bay of Fundy. We've taken their sonar data and created an app which they can go and show a scaled visualization of where the assets for tidal generation are compared to the channels and all of that. And it's been very successful, and they've been very happy. And again, where we do a 3D visualization of where assets may go in for communities to accept, we're seeing a much quicker uptake. And it's so important because for us with climate change adaptation or renewable energy, the time to act is now. So thank you very much for asking that question.
Well, thanks for your answer. And I'm wondering if others have views on this too.
Well, certainly, I mean, I agree, and I want to compliment Barry and his group there. They've done a fantastic job with the visualizations they've produced. I guess, from a very fundamental point of view, if you're trying to demonstrate or show somebody a process that is dynamic and moving, then an animation is by far the best way to try to explain that to someone. As Barry mentioned, So many data sets are captured now in full three dimensions. A lot of people can't understand and look down at a plan view map and really understand it all and get it. To somebody like me, it's second nature, but sometimes a perspective view or visualizing the data in 3D allows for relationships between objects or features to be more easily understood and so on. And the last point I'll make about sort of awareness, public awareness and so forth, we have a website that's developed that fetches the predicted storm surge 10 days out in advance, marries that with the tide, and a user then can look at that chart and see when the storm surge is going to occur, and at the same time see what areas are going to be flooded. And that, you know, is a very powerful tool, and after every storm I get lots of calls from potential land purchasers asking about whether their property is vulnerable to flooding and so forth. So I think more of those tools we can develop and make available to the public. Hopefully better decisions will be made about where people build and things like that.
And with that, I think your point about making it useful and available to the public in the language they know. So if somebody's talking about turbidity as an example, who doesn't know anything about ocean data, that is
right.
Illogical in terms of a measure and what does a figure actually mean. And I think it's providing the information to those who have the knowledge, but then also give me a green, a yellow, and a red. And at what point is this no longer safe, and at what point this is? So I think it's all around the visualizations that can be used for the end user and designed for them to make the appropriate decisions.
Agree 100%.
I can't agree more with the focus on the end user. It's 100% correct. You know, when we look at information on the bridge of a ship that can be displayed so that it can, you know, be used to make good navigational decisions, you know, it has to be presented in a way that's relevant and timely. You know, it's no good to present information that people don't want. It's no good to present information too late for people to act on it. And it's no good to present it in a way that takes people a long time to digest it. We also need to make sure that, you know, particularly in time critical situations like we're talking about on the bridge of a ship, it needs to be presented in a way that draws attention to the important information, but doesn't distract people away from the task that they're doing. You know, we're all familiar with how, you know, a dinging cell phone draws you away from the work you're doing and how it takes you a little while to get your head back into it. You know, when we're talking about things that are, you know, really time bound, that becomes really important. And then there are also good questions about, you know, reliance on technology, right? It's great that we're collecting all of this data and we're providing it to people, but we don't want to make people reliant on it. We don't want to erode existing skill sets. We want people to still be able to use, you know, their own senses and their training to continue to make good decisions. And I think we're seeing sort of a backlash against some technology in a way. So a lot of the navies around the world have reintroduced training with a sextant as a core skill for officer training, right? So even in this age of GPS, we're falling back on the old tools as an important skill to have.
Great, thank you. So you're speaking a lot about ships there, and of course, autonomous vessels is certainly an area where data has a huge impact on maritime operations. Vessel autonomy can be implemented at different levels, from humans completely in the loop to completely out of the loop, and this range of different scenarios and configurations implies, at least to me, different types of human-computer interactions. So this question, I know Matthew has a lot of, is deeply involved in autonomous ships, so maybe you can start us off here, Matthew. But the question is, what are the implications for the safe operation of maritime vessels arising from the different ways that people and artificially intelligent agents interact in that autonomous vessel context?
Yeah, I think, you know, this is one of the more interesting questions about autonomy, is how do autonomous vessels, how do autonomous actors interact with vessels or actors that are being piloted by humans? You know, we're seeing a little bit of a test case of this with autonomous cars starting to get out on the roadways. And, you know, you hear anecdotes periodically about how this can go wrong. I think one of the key problems here is that it relates to interpreting intent, right? As drivers, we're pretty good at making inferences about other drivers' intent. You know, even if someone's not using their indicators, we'll see their positioning on a roadway and maybe understand that they intend to turn, or we'll see them closing the distance to the car ahead. and realize that indicates they're planning on overtaking. As humans, we're really good generalist problem solvers, and we can draw inferences even from unfamiliar situations. But autonomous algorithms or AI doesn't really have this general problem-solving skill. Even the best AI tends to be very good at solving a specific problem, and if it's given a problem that it's not familiar with, the results are really, unpredictable. So this is going to be problematic, I think, when we talk about autonomous vessels. If there's traffic that's not following the rules of the road, right? One of the benefits we have with big ships is the call regs and the rules of the road are really well defined, and big ships tend to follow those. But if you put an autonomous vessel in an area where there's lots of traffic, potentially with unskilled or recreational operators doing unpredictable things, I think that's one of the key dangers that we have with any type of autonomous algorithm, dealing with that unpredictability and not really understanding the intent. So I think that's that's the downside of it. I think in the utopian future, it's possible that all vessels in an area may be connected through a sort of an Internet of Things that we keep hearing about, and that would allow the sharing of intent between all of these vessels. It even has potential for things that we haven't even begun to consider yet, like cooperative decision making, where speed and routing of each vessel is optimized for the best outcomes of the group rather than a single vessel. So it's a super interesting area of research, certainly how autonomous things are going to interact with humans. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks. Anyone else want to weigh in on autonomy? Jennifer,
I love this topic. It's fantastic. I love talking about Teslas and how they fail and what bias someone might have had when they trained that algorithm, and were they considering pedestrians and who is their priority and the trolley problems and all of these things. But it's all a great point that it comes down to the training data, and we should have been tracking and starting to collect training data 20 years ago to be building out for autonomous systems to be operating today. And so now we're at the point of LiDAR and radar and video and everything else. There's a reason why a Tesla's not driving autonomously in this weather today. Here we're seeing in Halifax where we have crazy winds. It wouldn't function. And so I think it's trying to make sure that we have every potential use case. And there's a reason why Waymo and Teslas often make a lot of right-hand turns and not left-hand turns, because they know a left-hand turn is dangerous. So when it comes to a vessel, does that mean the vessels might end up taking the longer route as a result because it knows it might be more dangerous to go certain paths? So I think autonomous doesn't always mean better. It might in the future, in the long term, mean safer, but I think there's a lot of work that we have to do, and there's thankfully lots of people working on it, which is great.
I'll pick up, there's one key thing I think I should mention there. Autonomy is really good, like you said, but safety is key. And it's all very well for Facebook's algorithms to show me the correct advert 99% of the time. But when we start looking at, really safety critical operations like shipping, it's no good for a ship to make a good decision 99% of the time. If it's wrong 1% of the time, it's absolutely catastrophic. So the robustness required for autonomy to be deployed in things like the shipping industry is much higher than most applications where we're seeing autonomy and artificial intelligence applied right now.
When we start thinking about autonomous agents and autonomous machines and artificial intelligence, I think a lot of people go to thinking about safety. And working on the ocean has always been a hazardous thing. It still is. It probably will continue to be. But my question is, how does data and the increase of automation in the marine sector, how does it help minimize loss and damage? How does it help improve safety? Can we start with you, Jennifer, and then see what others have
Sure.
to say?
I mean, I think one of the best things that we're eventually going to have, hopefully, is more triggers and warnings. It's not that you're necessarily going to prevent things. It's that, you'll get a chance to know that maybe it's not the rogue wave that comes infrequently, but at least you'll know the severity of a storm or the likelihood of a path of a hurricane. Like, I think the more data that we're collecting hopefully will allow us to better inform and make smarter decisions. And it's not necessarily prevention, but it's just more around the information that's going to be provided.
I would agree that certainly the modeling and the predictions are getting much better, and as a result, you know, you have a pretty good idea when you're going out what conditions you're going to be encountering, or the time window you have to try to get your work done. And I suppose the other thing to add would be the use of more and more remote sensing to collect data, where we don't have to actually physically be on the ocean and so forth. Of course, it has certain limitations as well, but definitely, and conditions like today in Halifax, not too much remote sensing other than radar would probably be very suitable today.
And Matthew or Barry?
Yeah, you know, I agree with all of what you guys said. Certainly, I think though there's even more, you know, interesting stuff, at least in my mind, right? I think the most interesting thing is just different ways of looking at risk and understanding risk. So when we look at ships operating in ice, most of the traditional methods of assessing risk have been very ship-centric. So they focus on preventing damage to the ship very specifically. There's been some really interesting recent work done, though, that looks beyond the ship and tries to account for the consequences of an accident in a more holistic way. So we take more factors into account, such as like the sensitivity of the local environment, the number of people aboard the ship, the availability of search and rescue, et cetera, then our perception of risk in a given scenario changes. And of course, being able to have this holistic view refers back to, you know, what has already been said about measuring and understanding the environment we're operating in. But I like this concept of modifying our risk perception because it
do we still have Barry, or do we lose it?
Really well with sort of all stakeholders overall.
We lost you for a moment there, but I think we got most of what you said, so thanks.
Yeah, right on.
Do we still have Barry on the line?
Yeah, I'm still here, yeah.
Okay, good. Anything to add, Barry, about the role of safety in all of this, in increasing datification in the marine sector? What are your views on safety in that respect?
Well, honestly, mine is outside of all of the autonomous in the shipping things. It's mostly about the coastal interface, and what I go back to giving people a personal experience so they can relate to, like, say, storm surges. And so where we allow people to actually see their houses or their cars if they were captured at the time of flyover, that they're starting to act and act accordingly for land use. So it's my experience, or my expertise is very, very, I'll say, focused on that. So other than that, no. But once again, the data getting in people's hands so they can act accordingly, in the EMO people, and there are EMO people in First Nations and non-Indigenous communities that are using this to evaluate risks. So I guess that's the only thing I can talk about safety.
Great, thank you. So we're getting pretty much down to the wire, and I'd like to get over to the Q&A section, but I do have one more question for you first, which is I think a pretty simple one. Where do you see the sector in 10 years? Why don't we start with Matthew?
That was a dangerous question to answer, isn't it? But I'll hope that people forget what I say before 10 years are up. So I'm going to step away from talking directly about data. I'm going to pick up on some of the cues about climate change and dealing with the effects of climate change that some of the other panelists have mentioned. So with melting sea ice, we're seeing a lot more traffic in the Arctic Ocean. That's for shipping and resource exploitation and even recreation. So we're losing thick multi-year ice in a significant rate, while large areas of the Arctic still see seasonal first-year ice. Paradoxically, this may mean that more ships are operating in ice, since many vessels can operate in the relatively light first-year ice. So as the ice season gets shorter and conditions less severe, more shipping routes are going to open up. And perhaps the most significant of these, if only because it's likely to be the first one that opens, is the Northern Sea Route, which runs along the north coast of Russia. So if this becomes viable, it cuts off several thousand nautical miles from the voyage between Asia and Europe, and avoids the fees and traffic congestion, things like that, of areas like the Suez Canal. So if this opens up, it represents a huge shift in the shipping industry with some really significant geopolitical implications. And if we're going to be able to start to use this different sea route in some challenging environmental conditions, we're really going to have to take advantage of new sensor technologies, new ways of looking at risk, and even improved communications technologies at high latitudes to make sure that everything unfolds safely with, I think, what is probably going to be a fairly inevitable change in the way the shipping industry is running globally.
Thanks. Jennifer.
I mean, I think that that I'd like to think there's a huge renewal and focus on sustainability, that in 10 years from now, we have well understood the impact that any noise we make in the ocean has on mammals, and so we found alternative methods for us to collect information and data in the most effective, sustainable way, and that we're making intelligent decisions as a result of the data that we're collecting. And I think right now we're still in the phase of we need to collect more. We still don't understand the carbon impact of the ocean. We don't have enough data there, so I'd like to think that we're in the best position to continue to support and grow how much data we're collecting, and we're using it well.
Great, thanks. Barry, where do you think data visualization is going over the next 10 years or so?
Well, I hope that it advances, and obviously from the little bit of feedback that we've had over the last couple of years, virtual reality, all of that stuff, the adoption of this technology is well, the gaming industry is moving ahead substantially, and we're going to be following suit in that. For me, I believe if I had to answer your question indirectly, I'm really hoping with the data and the science that people are going to have a paradigm shift in what they consider is acceptable in society. So we may actually reduce our consumption and perhaps the use of energy until we have clean energy. So I'm rambling a bit here, but technology is moving ahead every single day. So things are going to advance, and with that, I think we're going to have more tools to help the general populace understand what has to be done and why.
Leave the last word on this to Tim.
Well, certainly in my business, we're probably going to see more and more UAVs. Right now, they're still very much challenged with respect to power and temperature and obviously environmental conditions. Probably more AI for processing the data and driving products from it than what we're currently using. From that, I'm expecting we'll have better models in terms of, in my case, the coastal zone and interaction. And I really am hoping we're going to move from collecting sort of baseline information and one-off scenarios into more of a monitoring of our ecosystem environment and mapping out changes that are occurring, and then hopefully being able to better understand what are the impacts of those changes, what's causing those changes, especially to things like eelgrass beds that are critical ecosystems along the coast.
Great, thanks. So while we've been talking, I've been hearing questions coming in on my phone, so I'm just going to open that up. I'm not playing Wordle.
Today's word was a pain.
Oh, you shouldn't have told me that.
Well, it could have been any one of 24,000, or 2,400. I don't know how many words there are. I don't know.
Okay, so the first question is, I believe Barry and Tim have collaborated in the past. I think that's true. Could you tell us about a recent project that you've worked on together?
Tim, did you want to lead on that one, or?
The one that comes to mind a little bit, Barry, is our original work in the Mahone Bay area, and then your follow-up work with that, if you wanted to.
Sure.
That's a good one.
Well, I don't know if I'll be answering this question directly, but Tim and I started working together because of a perceived need here, and we relied on Tim and his group to bring us up to speed. But we did work in the town of Mahone Bay here, and they it being somewhat on a floodplain, again they had a report, and we were able to visualize it. And Tim was I'll say the technical authority on that, and the QA person on in the early days until we got chart datum and everything under wraps and well understood in the regional offsets. Like I said, once again, the collaboration with Tim and the University of Victoria and other groups has been great, because ultimately, the work that Tim does, as Tim mentioned, Tim and myself, we can see in 3D, we can visualize, we can read maps, and there's not a lot of people. So I'm just I like to say that we're helping people like Tim to get the word out and change to be affected. I hope I answered that question.
I can very quickly add, we've also done a project with Pucknankeck First Nation in Palmcat Harbor, where they have a small experimental oyster lease, and they're looking to expand that. And Barry was part of that project as well, to sort of visualize, what a bay might look like if you put aquaculture in there. Of course, the idea of social license, we see this conflict sometimes, where development wants to take place in the coast, and there's resistance to that. And in part, maybe it's because it's not been explained, it's not been presented, what is it going to look like, and so forth. And I think that's where the very strong visualization tools that Barry's team have developed can really help explain what the future could look like if this development takes place.
Great, thanks.
Absolutely.
The next question is about autonomous machines and safety. And the question is, what methodologies are being utilized to improve the safety of autonomous? And the questioner gives an example, e.g. a Six Sigma approach to eliminate variations and defects. Does that work in that context? So maybe Matthew, do you have some views on that?
Yeah, I think so. It's a difficult and fairly broad question. So I can speak to, the strategy that we're approaching our research with, I guess. So we're not jumping directly into autonomous vessels or even anything that happens in the field. And I can't really take credit for any of this work, because it's the brilliant people that I work with that actually execute it. But really, the way we're doing the research is based on a numerical platform. So we have a simulation environment where we can develop technologies and test them out in lots of different scenarios. And we also make fairly extensive use then of our model test facilities in St. John's. So we can take all of these new technologies at a model scale, so reduced scale, reduced risk, and test them out in situations that are more realistic in a real world context. And it's only after we kind of develop things using these lower risk methods that we start to push them out into the real world. And we're not to that point yet. We're not pushing out any autonomous stuff into the real world. And I think so. That's how the research is unfolding. But sort of on the point of view of operations, there's going to be no direct jump again to autonomy, right? There's lots of different frameworks, or a few different frameworks for how this will progress. But all of them start with very large amounts of human oversight, very simple systems being made autonomous, very simple situations being made autonomous. But even as we progress and more autonomy creeps into the sector, even the highest levels of autonomy still envision human oversight. So then the key questions become, how do you alert the human that one of the ships that they're overseeing is potentially getting into trouble? But I don't think currently there's nobody really envisions a marine sector where things are fully autonomous. I think there's always going to be human oversight. And that's really driven by this need to reduce risk.
Great, thanks. We have one more question here, and maybe I'll direct this at you, Jen, but if anybody can jump in who has some thoughts on this. do you have any thoughts on what steps need to be taken to prepare the workforce for a greater level of automation in the marine sector?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things is the understanding of a standardization of data that we collect. So I think it's making people understand that as you're collecting, let's say, you know, you have an autonomous vessel or an unmanned system originally and you want to make it autonomous as it travels across the harbor. You know, you need someone who can go and collect the video footage, label it, let them know that's a ferry, that's, you know, the various documentation pieces that we need to have, and that it needs to be collected in a consistent way. So if you're also trying to leverage wind speeds and wave heights, you can't go and move a buoy without noting it and suddenly use that in your same models as well. I think there's education around all of the inputs that need to go into making things autonomous. And autonomous doesn't necessarily have to mean a vessel. Autonomous can mean that decisions are made without people. So you could clean and process data in an automated way. It's, again, the same thing. You had to have an intelligent decision. You have to have broad agreement that what that end outcome prediction is and that it's a fair and just outcome as well. So I think it's making sure that students have some ethics, they understand data, they have some awareness of strategic thinking, that does this make sense? Should we be trying to make this system autonomous? Because to Matthew's point, maybe autonomous isn't better. And I think it's a well-rounded, educated workforce is what we need. We need people who can think for themselves, but understand some math and some science and all collaborate together.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to hand it back over to Wayne in a minute to kind of tie everything together. But before I do, I'd like to thank Barry, Jennifer, Matthew, and Tim for coming on the panel today. I think each of you you'll come from very different areas and have different perspectives on this question or these questions. But I think we've seen that there's also a lot of commonality and common ground and even overlap in approaches, techniques, and perspectives on this. So once again, thank you for your great participation in this. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you.
See you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. It's, now that I...
Thank you, everyone. In closing, I do want to thank everyone involved, our panelists who we've enjoyed time with today, our sponsors, the province of Nova Scotia and CTAC, our host here at Cove, and the whole team behind the scenes, NSCC staff, students, Atlantic Livestream, making this all possible and bringing it together from a technological perspective. Thank you very much. Also to you, our guests in the audience, for joining us today. If, in case you missed any part, I know there's some places, including my own home, the power has been out at parts of this. So glad we're broadcasting from some place that has a backup generator. But if you missed any parts, this has all been recorded and it will be posted to the NSCC Applied Research YouTube channel. So you can review any part of it. So with that, we'll wrap it up and hope that you enjoyed this event today and that we'll see you again at the 7th EnergyDATA Workshop. Have a good day.